Dr. Jenkins? Thought so. Some about a room somewhere. We gotta get in.
He's on the Zoom. He's on the Zoom. Ready when you are.
All right, I would like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the Monday, March 13th meeting of the operations group. The first agenda item is public input. There are no written statements submitted for this meeting. We do have one virtual public appearance.
Our speaker is Sean Vogel.
Great. Hi, Sean. You have 3 minutes.
All right, thank you, board member Gomez Schmidt and all the other board members and staff and students and community members joining us tonight. I'm coming to speak around agenda item 4, which is the Student Safety and Wellness Ad Hoc Committee recommendations that are being presented to you tonight. I want to thank board member Pearson and the student Senate President Lavinia, who have stewarded this committee over the last, I think, over a year. And I want to really lift up and back them up on a few of the recommendations that they're going to be presenting to you tonight. I just want to, I think there's a couple, I think they're all really strong recommendations, and I want to speak to the process in terms of all the input that they receive and the from students and from other community partners. I think that you can really believe in what you see before you tonight. But in particular, I want to talk about a couple of things that our Healthy Kids Collaborative, of whom I work with and I'm a part of, and our partners heard a lot about through the wellness policy process and listening to community members and students around. And that is nutrition and the building services components that are pretty early on in that recommendation. So around nutrition, I would say that when we did listening sessions last March with students, nutrition and building, and particularly around like restroom access and restroom experiences, were 2 areas that we heard a lot about that we didn't quite figure out a way to work them in, I guess, in specifics in the wellness policy. And I'm really glad that they're being presented here again in these recommendations tonight. So I've continued to work with some students along with other partners around school meal, the school meal work. And so I would just ask that this group thinks about ways to prioritize these recommendations in terms of the budget process for this coming school year. These are great recommendations, and they're only going to be as strong in as you know in terms of as how they're implemented this coming year. And I really hope that you all take them into consideration as you face some tough decisions coming up in terms of prioritizing what is funded and what is not. And what I would say is that student safety and student wellness is the foundation for learning. If students aren't safe and students aren't well, it's going to be a whole lot harder for them to learn. And so knowing that you all have a lot of competing priorities and hard decisions ahead of you, I would just really lift up the recommendations around nutrition and building safety, and implore you to work with Josh Perkins and his team to figure out ways to prioritize some of the nutrition services pieces, as well as Cedric and his group around some of the building services, as they really align with a lot of what we heard throughout the wellness policy engagement sessions in this last school year. So thank you all, and keep up the good work. And again, thank you so much to board member Pearson and Lavinia for all the work that you all did leading that committee, and excited to see where it goes from here.
Thank you, John. All right, we are moving on to the approval of the minutes. I move to approve the minutes from the operations work group meeting dated February 13th, 2023.
Second, Nikki Vandermeul.
Thank you, Nikki. Joanna, your advisory vote.
Yep.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. All right, First on our agenda tonight are recommendations to the board from the Student Safety and Wellness Ad Hoc Committee. And I'm going to invite Vice President Maya Pearson and Student Senate President, I hope you have your title right, Lavinia Vupal, who helped lead this process. So I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we are going to try to keep the conversation around the recommendations as brief as possible, because we have a long agenda tonight. If you folks want to see in the public, want to see the recommendations, they are able to see it into board docs. So all of the recommendations have been uploaded there. And what we are going to do is just go over the categories of the recommendations. But first, Lavinia will kind of give a brief history and kind of context to the ad hoc itself and the recommendations, and then we'll start in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maya. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Lavinia Vopal, and I'm the co-chair for the Safety and Wellness Ad Hoc Committee alongside board member Maya Pearson. I'm also the president for the Student Senate and the alternate student rep to the Board of Education. So as Maya said, we wanted to give you guys some kind of history around the work that we've been doing in our committee. So our work started under Ananda and Gordon's leadership in April of 2022. In our committee, we have student core members from Memorial, West, La Follette, and East, as well as staff, teachers, and community members. But yeah, since April, we have been working to identify issues around safety and wellness in our district that our students, staff, and parents, and community members and guardians experience to create, a recommendation grid with actions for improvements. We've worked alongside many departments in our district, such as the critical response team, communications, and more. And in November, in support of the ad hoc committee's charge, we sent out a survey with the help of the district's research and innovation department. And the survey was sent out to everyone in the district, including parents and guardians. We received around 9,500 responses within 2 months of the survey's opening. And yeah, so using those responses and very, very thoughtful feedback we received from the students, staff, and parents that filled it out, our committee members created recommendations that fit under 7 different categories, which Maya and I will be discussing briefly today. But the categories are nutrition, building and facilities, general staffing, staff mental health, student behavior, student mental health, and training. And yeah, so through many discussions, edits, and administration feedback, as well as the survey results and the feedback from that, our committee has worked incredibly hard to create these recommendations and format them to fit the committee's vision of safety and wellness. And we hope you acknowledge these recommendations and take them into consideration. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lavinia. So the first part that I'll discuss is just the internal advisory panel. And so based off of the conversation that we've had with the ad hoc and the other committee members and the community, one thing that folks really wanted to ensure was that once we make these recommendations and all the work that had been put into it doesn't go somewhere and die. That they are recommendations that will live on and continuously being worked on at the board level and administration level. And so it's recommended that we have an internal advisory panel to the superintendent. And so we came up with a format of that will include teachers, staff, a board member, students, and trying to bring also community members in on that. And the charge for that advisory panel would really be to advise the superintendent and ensure that the recommendations that we are making will actually kind of come to that they will come to fruition. And it's also kind of an accountability measure as well. So for the nutrition recommendations, for nutrition, And we'll just go over the overviews of each of them. The nutrition recommendations really center around food access, making sure that students have like healthier meals, but also that they have meals that they want to eat and not really focusing on what adults think kids want to eat and should eat. So making sure that student voice is a part of that conversation. We heard from a lot of folks in the survey, and the conversations at the ad hoc was around recess and also having other extra healthy ways to engage in outside of just nutrition and just actual food. Part of that is the students would like to have a little more recess time, and possibly ensure that there are snacks that are available that aren't necessarily snacks that are coming from parents, that it's something that is built into the day, and that it's something that the district can actually take the foot on. Moving on to building facilities. And what we'll do is we'll go through each category and you guys can ask questions at the end. Building facilities, these recommendations were really focused on ensuring that staff and the building and ground staff really had time to put into ensuring that the buildings were safe and clean. And so there were some recommendations of coming up with checklists that could possibly be, reviewed daily, and just making sure that everyone in the building knew that these things were actually happening. I know that there were some faulty, or I won't say there was some faulty, but there were some issues with the cooling systems at some of the high schools, even though some of the renovations were happening. And so making sure that as we are moving into the summer months, hopefully soon, we're still in winter, but that the cooling systems and heating systems are working properly. And one of the biggest conversations that we did have was around the cell phone policy, which I know that we as a board are looking to work on and ensure that we have something more conclusive on that. I'll go into general staffing. The general staffing and staff mental health recommendations really were focusing on ensuring that not only our students were healthy, but also our staff were healthy, making sure that we had enough staff in the building, and the staff that we would consider as essential when it comes to mental health, and that those folks actually, the ratios were should be smaller, and that we should ensure that there's more psychologists and social workers, nurses and counselors. So that was something that we definitely kind of pulled together from our surveys, and we agreed upon to make sure that that happens. For the staff mental health, just really focusing on ensuring that staff were more healthier, that they had a good work-life balance, that folks were being able to put in the time, but also ensuring that they had enough mental space to be able to give to the students, ensure that they are showing up as their whole self. I will say that a lot of these recommendations as we go through this really get at a few key points that I'll mention later at the end. Lavinia, you can go ahead and talk about the student behavior.
Yeah, so student behavior was a really big category, and it was one that we noticed a lot in our survey. So a lot of our recommendations and ideas and discussions came from the survey responses that we received. But basically, the main kind of thing our recommendations kind of point towards is kind of just making sure that students are aware of like the behavioral educational plan, making sure that that's communicated efficiently with the students, and making sure that everybody knows the levels of it, but also to make sure that we're including our community voices in revising the behavior educational plan, and making sure that their voices are being heard when we're reviewing the education plan. And just making sure that there's that community sort of input. but also just like making sure that our school environments are a safe place for everyone. A lot of our recommendations, some of our recommendations recommend that we analyze where we are right now with safety in schools and take actionable steps on ways to improve. And a lot of the things that we talked about kind of came around to trust around communication. And that was a huge theme that we noticed among the students, making sure that MMSD and the schools are more transparent with issues and communicating with staff and parents whenever there are safety concerns at our schools, and prioritizing specifically that safety communication to staff who are in the building with students are in a position to be aware of possible threats. But yeah, just like making sure that we're making sure to be transparent with issues and just making sure that everybody's aware of the behavioral educational plan. But yeah, that was kind of like the main thing around student behavior. Moving on to student mental health, which was another big category. Mainly, we wanted to make sure that students are aware of the resources that are available for them to access and use. So once again, improved communication about behavioral health supports that are there for staff and families as well, making sure that we have a plan of when and how we are going to inform and communicate with students about these resources. And we have specific recommendations about that in our recommendations under this category. But yeah, going along with communicating with our students about resources, possibly considering partnering with public health agencies to create mental health communications to students and staff. And just in general, making sure that amidst staffing shortages, that we are working to ensure that there are social workers, therapists, psychologists, counselors, and nurses that are able to devote most of their time to their work and support our students, staff, and community members. And all to just make sure that they have the support and resources they need to feel safe and welcome.
Thank you. And so the last category that we had another lengthy conversation on, and that definitely a lot of the recommendations came from the community, was around training. So there are lots of recommendations under that, but I will say some of the more salient ideas really focus around ensuring that not only some staff have certain trainings, but really making sure that all staff, whether that is custodians, like for instance, the NVCI, which is the Nonviolent Crisis Intervention Training, ensuring that it's not just happening, at the beginning of the school year, but that it's happening throughout the school year, and then happening on a reoccurring basis. So it's not like I learned it once when I start working here, but I'm constantly learning it every year and having refreshers. So that it's not kind of lost, and that it's not just only certain staff that are having it, but it's really like all of the staff, anyone that is working with our students, just so that there is also, again, more of I would say continuation across the board in making sure that it's being done very similarly, if that makes sense. And so that's just like one big one that we did have a lengthy conversation about. I think the general ideas really come down to making sure that accountability is happening, for having accountability checks. A lot of these things are already happening in our district, and some are doing them really well. Some areas are doing really well at it, some are not so well, but really trying to make sure that we're checking our accountability and that transparency is happening, really, and focusing on that stabilization just across the district in all schools. And so that it's not just some are doing really well, some aren't. There's more resources here. There's teachers that might be more trained here in certain areas, but not, some in other schools. So really focusing on that. And so our last recommendation is to make sure that that the recommendations that we are advancing from the committee continue to be followed up on and monitored for implementation by the superintendent safety and wellness advisory panel. And that further recommendations, and it's further recommended that accountability measures be considered by the panel as a tool for how recommendations are to be implemented, that the Board of Education can use a framework for moving forward regardless of any changes in leadership and create safety stability. So that was one thing that we made it very clear, that no matter who is a board member, no matter who is the superintendent, no matter who is in administration or teachers or principals, that really we are crafting and creating a space that it can continue to be stabilized, no matter who's in those places. So that is our presentation, and we welcome comments.
Great, thank you. Board Member Vandermeulen.
Yes, one, excellent work. I'm thrilled with the Student Senate especially, and anyone who could get over 9,000 survey responses, please tell me how you did that, because we can't get them for anything else. So clearly you're much better at it than we are. And I say that with all respect. Two, I would change one thing, and that would be for the group to be responsible to the superintendent and inform the superintendent and the board. I think it's an easy change of one sentence. The other one, I went to a listening session at East with this board, and we heard about a 15-year-old who had disabilities and had no idea on the safety plan, because she was told she should wait there and someone would come rescue her. That's not a safety plan. That's a plan for, oh, if we have time, you'll live. I'm sorry, but I hate being that blunt, but let's be honest. What we are doing is not telling our disabled students you have a right to feel safe. First time I raised this issue was 6 years ago. And I was told by the head of security at that point that they had to focus on security for everyone else, then they could focus on the disabled. That was 6 years ago. I'm not sure how much has changed. I sure the heck hope that we could at least make our safety plans, even if they have to privately be given to the disabled student, so that they can at least know that someone's going to rescue them, so that it can feel that they can attend school, or in a God forbid, in a mass shooting, that someone is there to actually protect them instead of just hope they don't get locked out of the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. I will say that we had a representative from each of the high schools on the ad hoc. And there were stark differences between each high school and how they were kind of conducting their drills and their plans, and making sure that students knew that. So there is a recommendation here that really focuses on the better, like it says, better and more transparent communication to staff and parents whenever the issues, but also making sure that students know what those plans are and that students are a part of that. So, you know, we did hear that young lady, make that comment, and it's, it tugged on all of us. We were just like, what is happening, right? But I think that's
I almost
right.
cried.
So I think that's another point where students, including all different students, part of that, because again, her voice should be able to be elevated in that space.
And I thank Adriana for the question. I truly, and she gave me permission to use her name where I would not.
Thank you, Nikki.
Board Member Simkin or Dr. Jenkins, I see your hand. Did you want to respond specifically to this?
Yes, to the East situation that Board Member Vandermeulen just mentioned, just know that we're going to come back to the whole board, but that response to that. And I really appreciate, first of all, let me just say, Lavinia and Board Member Pearson, I had read the report, got the report earlier. I really do appreciate it. And I think that this is the type of thing that can help all of us to have a systematic response in our district, so that all students, all staff, everyone comes in, feel really safe. But just on this particular point, in a way for us to make sure that we're calibrating on whatever comes up, this is something that we can come back to the board with in the meetings, and then just give a report out, or I can give it out Thursday, but in the meetings, it helps everybody understand what's going on. So just expect to follow up from our schools on this, from me to you all, or from whichever administrator. And I love the piece where it's not just about who's sitting in the seat, Board Member Pearson being a board member or superintendent. Everyone needs to be on the same page about our safety, everyone in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins.
And I will say, Nikki, because I did forget to answer your other question, there is a board member that is on the panel. And so there will be a board member, or should be a board member that is assigned to that panel that will continue the work with that panel in itself. So it's not that, you know, there will only be accountability on the administration side, but there will be a board member there as well.
I just want to see the report comes back to the board.
All right, Board Member Simpkin, followed by Board President Muldrow.
Thank you. First I want to thank everyone on the committee for all of this work. I know it was started quite a while ago and you put in a lot of time and thought. And I'm also really impressed at 9,000 responses for a survey. That's phenomenal. And Lavinia, I just want to say thank you. You are an excellent public speaker and I appreciate your work as well. I want to make sure that that we figure out a way to actually incorporate these very reasonable suggestions into our budget, because there's a lot of budgetary implications to what you said. In some cases, I think some of the recommendations are related to empty spaces that we have in our district. And so we know that we need more. Also, we know that we need more people in certain categories. And so this just affirms that, to me, it affirms that the students and the families are feeling that gap. And so to me, I think the call to action is, how do we actually operationalize this? And so I agree, having, you know, a connection to the superintendent is great, but let's also let this sit with the board to figure out where our entry points are to start shifting around some funding to make sure that we're being responsive to what our community wants, which is to have a healthy, safe environment.
So we have had the preliminary conversations with Dr. Jenkins on the recommendations. And the idea is then that they will come back together, they will come together as a senior leadership team and figure out where some of this work lies. And then where then we will be adding dollar amounts and possible dollar amounts, and also policy changes that might need to happen, or whatever things that might need to change. And so this was kind of like the first large lift. And then the next lift will be then for the administration to work on that, and then also come back to us as a board. And part of my job and Lavinia's job during this process is right now is to also continuously make sure that this is happening, so that as we are on, well, as Ross is next to me, as he's working on the budget books for us, that we're still having that clear communication between us. So
that sounds great. I hope that there's a way that we can embed this in our operation agenda so that it doesn't at any point start to fall off, because it is important to keep this.
yeah, we can definitely talk about this. I can talk about with the chair about adding a portion just as an update, if that's fine.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Board President Muldrow.
So I just want to respond to the thing you just said about dating around this work. I agree wholeheartedly. And we have multiple spaces where we could do this update, but right now, the wellness committee, the safety and wellness ad hoc committee is updated during every regular board meeting. So the panel could shift from updating as the committee to updating as the panel at the regular board meeting, so that we're staying involved in that, and it naturally kind of fits in the same space. I think that's just a suggestion. If folks prefer that operating, I completely understand. I do think that there's a series of things that have cost implications, right? That you have to invest in staff and you have to get kind of a little bit more specific maybe than this document is allowing for us to get right now. So if you say we want more social workers, we want more mental health support, how much more, right? And what are we using to gauge that, I think is something I'm interested in seeing us work through in collaboration with our administration. We've done 3 safety ad hoc committees in the last 5 years. We've done 2 of them while I was on this board. I want to acknowledge the work of the folks who did this work beforehand. So Board Member Castro, with Board President Gloria Reyes at the time, brought recommendations forward to the board. I don't know actually who chaired and led the first version of this ad hoc, but I think I bring that up to say I don't know if we want to keep creating ad hocs around this. And I think one of the reasons we've struggled to move beyond kind of the ad hoc format as a board is because of follow through around the recommendations and transparency around the recommendations. So I want to ask Board Member Castro, what did it look like to follow up on the recommendations that were brought forward, and how many of the recommendations that we're getting now overlap with the recommendations we saw for the second ad hoc?
Yeah, I could probably do a compare and contrast with the documents, as I'm still kind of fully engaging and digesting this document. But I mean, it's just a multi-year, multi-departmental effort, and does require some long-term planning, and recognizing that, in terms of trying to fully implement all these things, it's going to be a multiple year effort, probably, dealing with the reality of turnover and staff that is carrying the work as well. And so it's really just making a conscious effort on our part to see this stuff through. I do agree that, we don't want to have, too many ad hocs on this issue, and, we just need to be diligent about following through with these recommendations.
Board Member Castro, can I ask how we implemented recommendations from the last ad hoc, and is that group that was meeting with the superintendent still meeting with the superintendent, or where are you all standing in terms of that body of work? Kind of where did that cut off or connect to this body of work?
You probably have to ask staff for that answer.
Dr. Jenkins, would you be able to speak to how that group worked with you?
Yeah, I think with the last group, the recommendations came pretty much, and that's why I'm glad we're at this point right now after the budgetary priorities. And so I think what's going now, and I said it to Board Member Pearson, that we get ahead of the recommendations in the budgetary position that we're going to take in terms of our priorities, basically, because I don't think that, it's not that I don't think, I know the last recommendations, the number were really good. We tried to infuse them into the work that they were budgeted for, as we have a potential to do right now, right in alignment with our priorities. And in order to do this work, we have to put it up ahead of the start of the budget itself and say, what is it that we really prioritize? And we have to support it. And I think that was coming out of some of the initial part of this conversation. So the work we were trying to do around restorative, which was a part of those recommendations too that we had in it, how had we aligned ourselves in the budget? Some of those priorities, I would say a great majority of them were not within the budgetary priorities we laid out, but we were trying to make them happen. So I agree, it's not as quite the level of follow through that I think we have the potential to do right now. We're right in the middle of the budget process. I think these recommendations are clear. I think they were inclusive, very inclusive. And so I would see a better opportunity to do this now than where we were. We were still coming out of the pandemic, and we were having to pivot on so many different things. Whereas right now, I think there's a lot more clarity on a lot of things. But this report, I think, is I wouldn't just even say better, it's at a different timing in our budgetary process that we really can support what we're saying right now. That's where I would say it.
I think what I hear you and Sabian saying is that the recommendations around kind of RJ and other components of the last version of this ad hoc were adopted, but maybe not to the level or extent we would have wanted them to be adopted. And so maybe part of what we're doing in this is kind of going back and examining the multiple recommendations we've gotten and figuring out how to strengthen our approach to those recommendations.
And I am saying what you just articulated, but I'm saying now we have an opportunity to support them financially and make them a part of our priorities and see which ones. And I think we have to look at a level of how we can realistically do them over multiple years. I think we came out very, I think we came out with high expectations for those recommendations the last time, but lacking the amount of budgetary supports in the various areas. Just like when you mentioned RJ, that's a great one to think about how we wanted it to go out fully. It didn't get executed in that way in all places. But right now, I think we do have the opportunity, if we want to prioritize that and let it reflect what our values are, we can do this. And I do think this is a great one. The recommendations, I said it earlier when I met with board member Pearson, that I think these are some recommendations we need to look at, and then we need to budget for them first and then do the rest of the budget. And that's, yes, so that's why.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if I can. Yeah, I mean, you know, I was not the project manager for those recommendations. You know, that was not my day job in terms of day-to-day seeing those recommendations through. But from a board perspective, from a governance perspective, you know, it was a mixed bag. We made some progress on some recommendations and some and not progress on others. For example, 4 high schools did hire the 4 RJ coordinators and have been building out that program since that. But another part of the recommendations was that, you know, the board took the RJ training, and that's come with mixed results. So it's been a mixed bag. But I'm sure that staff could follow up on that.
I think that's pretty much it for my questions. I want to thank Board Member Pearson and former Board Member Ananda Morelli. I want to thank Gordon Allen, and I want to thank you, Lavinia, for doing this work. I guess my last question would be, is who's the board member you're assigning to work with this, or how will we know which board member won't necessarily be the project manager, but will be charged with kind of following up and working with this effort consistently?
Yeah, so I will say that we did, just going back to your first questions, we did, as an ad hoc, review the previous ad hoc recommendations, because one of the things, again, we wanted to do was make sure that there was a continuation of work and that we weren't just creating a brand new document and recreating a lot of work. And I will say that the previous 2 ad hocs on safety really kind of aligned with what we are still seeing in some of the responses back from the survey and some of the recommendations that we also have here. And I think one of the parts of why we wanted to make sure that the panel was created was that, again, there's that continuation of work, that it doesn't just, you know, have a few administrators who might leave and then the work kind of like falls through, but that there is a continuation of it no matter who is in those places. And hence I mentioned in our general recommendation for the entire work that we've done in other previous and recognizing other previous work is that we wanted to create this and make sure that things are being followed through. As far as a board member right now, it would be me, since I've been part of the process. And so my hope is that as we are moving forward, it will be me, and then we can assign another board member for whatever reason if we needed to. But really that was part of why we were like, we cannot allow this just to be another heavy lift from the community and from students and parents and everyone, and teachers and board members. And then that it just kind of falls through the cracks. So hopefully that also answers your question somewhat, Holly.
Board Member Vandermillen, you have one quick follow-up?
Yes, I have one quick follow-up. I agree we need to fund these things, and there's some significant funding. But I just want to put on record that I agree with funding them, but not at the expense of our staff and our classroom staff, our teachers is my only statement, but I think we could do a heck of a lot in our safety plans. That's a no-brainer and should have been done a long time ago, and I'll be thrilled to do whatever you need, Maya, to be able to get this done as efficiently and effortlessly as possible.
Yeah, I will say there's a lot of wellness within this. That's not just only like, physical safety. I'm really thankful that we really went deep on that and not only focus on that piece, but really making sure that the whole child is supported, making sure that all staff are supported mentally, emotionally and such. So
Great work, thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you for all the work that went into this as well. I put myself in the queue just because my questions sort of aligned with what Board President Muldrow has already lifted, in the fact that I guess what I'm going to recommend is that now that we have the recommendations coming out of this committee, I would be interested in an analysis by our administration, senior leadership team, assistant superintendents or principals, or, I guess the appropriate departments, for how these recommendations fit with the work being done in these areas already. So I think we need, I think this was the step that got missed last time when when recommendations were accepted by the board, is we did not get this analysis back from administration to say, look, here are the things we are already doing. Here are the things we need to strengthen. Here are the things that can move faster for a variety of reasons. Here are the things that are more long-term. And I think because our staff are the ones who have to implement this, we do need that level of analysis, as well as understanding the costs. Some of these things will have a staffing implication. Some of them, though, are more about communication and training and things that we are already trying to implement. So one of the examples that I wrote in here was that we have made staffing investments over the last 2 years to reduce the ratio of the counselors, social workers. So I know that is something that the board has prioritized. I would be interested in an update to see how close we are getting, and a reminder of what those ratios are that we're aiming for. That's one example. And also the significant investments we've made in mental health and work towards, the school-based health centers. I don't think I have the name correct for that. That are going to be in the high schools. School-based health centers. So the work that's happening in that, the expansion of the non-crisis violence intervention training that we have been expanding. And so I would love to see how these recommendations fit with the work that is continuing and where the gaps are. So almost like a gap analysis is needed with that too. I guess one of my things, I printed out the recommendations from the previous ad hoc as well. And with that, as Sabian noted, we created 4 restorative justice coordinator positions, 1 for each comprehensive high school. And I guess I would be interested, in addition to this analysis, is how these positions are being used at each school and how we're measuring effectiveness, right? And how we're measuring how this is making a difference for students and staff in the schools. Another suggestion I had was, I'm wondering for the advisory group, if we could add an ELL staff member. I saw that there are special education staff included in that, and also an advanced learning staff member to the list of staff to include. And then the last thing is just sort of a protocol or procedure thing. The last time that the recommendations were brought to the board voted to accept the recommendations, and that sort of was the end of the ad hoc and the movement into an advisory structure. So I'm going to suggest that this comes as a action item out of the operations work group to the regular meeting next week, so that we can formally vote to accept the recommendations and then sort of hand this off to administration for that type of analysis. And then work with administration to set a deadline or a date or a timeline where that work might be able to be done. And I guess, Dr. Jenkins, I'd be interested in how that sounds to you as far as an analysis coming back to sort of figure out how this fits together.
I I tell you, in theory, it sounds great, but in practice, it sounds overwhelming. Because I have to watch out to the socio-emotional well-being of all of the employees. And I think if we take it and look at it over multiple years and be realistic about what we can fund, because there's that whole piece of wanting everything, but can't support many things, because I think what Board Member Vandermill was also saying in terms of just the realities of where we are budgetarily, and we know we can't have great scholars if we don't have great staff, and we have to prioritize that along with these things that our students and staff in our community is saying to us. So I think I just want to remind everybody, we're just pulling ourselves out of this pandemic, and people are tired. Students, staff, parents, everybody. And I'm so concerned about the social emotional well-being of people and keeping them intact and rolling together versus even pointing and putting all the expectations on one group over another. If it can happen anywhere, I know it can happen right here in Madison, Wisconsin, but it's not going to happen with the board doing it alone, or the administration, or the teachers, or the students. We have to sit back, and it's bigger than just the superintendent's seat or the board member seat. We have to sit back and say, okay, what are we willing to commit to? And how are we going to get there together? So I think we approach it like that. It brings humanism into the situation. I know that we all want to correct it tomorrow, but it's a historical thing that I believe that we all have to build into one another. Exactly how you laid it out, Board Member Gomez-Smith, I think, yes, that. But then practically, how do we bite it, this elephant, one bite at a time to resolve it so it can be sustained? We rushed into some things because of even political reasons, as just a staff, we just responded. And it can't just be a reaction. It's got to be, a solution, a real solution. I love the piece earlier when you talked about the monitoring, but we monitor together. We come back and see, is this working for Lavinia? And then we have to go back and get the students' voice. Hey, how's this? Can you see the reaction? Can you see the response? And that part that Nikki, Board Member Vandermill brought up about the student at East, we have to answer that right now. There's some low-hanging fruit in this, and we have to deal with the low-hanging fruit. But I think we need to look out. That's what I'll say to you. So in theory, overwhelming. Absolutely. I'm about to pass out. But in practice, because we've done this before, and we can do things together, I think we sit down and co-create this space that we really want to experience in MMSD. That's just coming from me, because I'm concerned about our support staff and all the people still having to sub for teachers and things of that nature, the short staff. I'm looking at the reality of it, and I think we need to get busy about making sure we retain our staff and recruit staff and do those things first. Like strong, and then these other things, I think there's room in there. We can kind of like co-walk and co-create this. That's what I was saying.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And I guess I'm just suggesting that if we have you do this analysis or work with your staff to do this, it should make the process easier so that we're not spinning our wheels and we are really recognizing where those low hanging fruit opportunities are to connect with the work that's already being done so that it isn't repetitive and it does take a proactive approach. But I really do feel like we do need the analysis. I'm not saying by tomorrow or next week. But I think we do need some understanding of how these fit with what is already happening and what we've already invested in. So
most definitely, I would be happy to work with Board Member Pearson, whoever designated from the committee, because in this we need student voice too, along with board members and staff voice. But in analysis, I agree everything you just said. I'm just saying the pace of it. I just want us to be able to do it so it can be sustained and not be here next year saying what we started to do and we didn't accomplish a whole lot of it. That's all.
all right, thank you. Any other questions? Comments?
So I will say that we are hoping that this is coming back to our regular board meeting on the 22nd. And it's not necessarily that we're accepting the recommendations, but more so that we are acknowledging that they have been received. Just because then I would think we would have to possibly go through every recommendation and say, take a vote on it. And I think it, allowing the panel and administration and us to kind of like work collaboratively on this, I think saying that we have
Yes.
acknowledged that we've received them.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification, because you're right. It is receiving the recommendations and then the
Yeah.
planning will continue. So I appreciate that clarification.
And I think Barb wanted to say something.
I just wanted to make one comment, yes, to respond to Chris's questions. And everybody's right, everybody's making really good points, and all of this stuff is really part of the structure of the panel, as well as future meetings with the board. So we are going to be looking at the recommendations to see which things are already happening, kind of where the status of them, and then other things that may require further funding and what that means. So that's in progress, Chris, and we will come back to the board to discuss these in more detail before the budget is finalized in June.
Great. Thank you so much, Barb, for clarifying that. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you, Maya, and thank you, Lavinia, for that presentation. We will move on to our next topic on the agenda. And that is the continued update on the budget process. We have Ross McPherson with us here tonight to talk with us about the budget development, in addition to the overall revenue look that we are going to continue to delve into. We are also talking tonight about healthcare benefits, equity projects, and strategic budget realignment. With that, I will turn it over to you, Ross.
Right, thank you. I do want to invite Tracy Carradine up too, because we're going to be kind of tag teaming some of the information in the upcoming slides. As I get set up here, we're going to start, as we do many of our discussions, not just budgetary discussions, but most of our presentations, grounding ourselves again in our goals, that every child is on track to graduate, ready for college, career, and community. District and every school in it is a place where children, staff, and families thrive. African-American children and youth excel in school. So tonight, I want to ground us again in not just our goals, but our budget planning approach. This is not a one and done type situation. We do the budget each year. We have a cyclical process in which we challenge all of our assumptions. We are nearing the point at which we're getting ready to prepare our first full budget picture for the board, which we'll be discussing in more depth in April. Unfortunately, as in every 2 years, we run into the same cycle we've had for about the last 12 years, where we do not have a state budget in place or a clear anticipation of what to expect. Some of what you'll hear tonight is information we discussed before, but I want to make sure that we keep these things of mind as we continue to plan with the few pieces of information we know at this point. So our objectives tonight is continued development of the 23-24 budget, some information regarding the gap closing that we're going to be doing over the next several weeks, and a confirmation of our health plan information, and a review of the potential excellence and equity project investments and budgetary realignment we've done so far. In the budgetary timeline, we are now, of course, in the month of March. Typically at this point of the year, we are renewing a lot of our expectations for the year, including our healthcare benefits, and we'll be discussing our excellence and equity projects and focus areas later tonight. So last couple months, you've heard me indicate what the DPI request was regarding the 23-25 budget for the state of Wisconsin. The governor has responded, actually the day after our last operations work group, and made a handful of changes that I want to make sure that the board and the public are aware of as we navigate the next several weeks. The governor echoed many of the requests from the Department of Public Instruction, which represent some of the highest requests for public education in the last 40 years. That being a per pupil adjustment on the revenue limit of $350 per pupil in fiscal year 24 and $650 in fiscal year 25. As a reminder, the revenue limits, which have been in place since 1993, have never seen an increase higher than $300 in any given year. So this is certainly an unprecedented ask of not only the Department of Public Instruction, but the governor as well. There is a renewed desire to count 4K students as full day students in membership calculations. Many of you may remember that full day 4K has been something we've been piloting as a district, and we will continue to do so on our own reconnaissance. However, we are only ever able to count those 4K students at 60% of their FTE value each year in that annual count. There is a significant investment in general aids between over the next 2 years, not only from the DPI request, but the governor's request as well. And a per pupil categorical change adjustment of $24 in the 23-24 or fiscal 24 year, and $45 after that in fiscal 25 or 24-25. The big change, though, that came out of the governor's response to the DPI budget request is that in the original DPI request, the reimbursement for special education categorical aid was requested to increase to 45% in year 1 and 60% in year 2. Many years, the reimbursement rate for special education has been hovering close to 30%. So this was a rather significant increase in special education categorical. It is a request we've seen before and has not been surviving in most recent state budget deliberations. However, the governor has now indicated that in year 1 of the biennium, he wants to see the categorical aid reimbursement go to 60%. This is a significant deviation from the DPI request. I have hopes that this type of funding will come to K-12 education in the future, but I'd be lying if I wasn't a little bit concerned after seeing how the last several budget cycles have turned out in this area. As a reminder, these categorical aid programs, special education categorical specifically, are outside the revenue limit and are reimbursement costs for costs we expense in a given year and receive essentially reimbursement in the following year once we report those costs to the DPI. And additionally, the categorical aid for bilingual bicultural aid is requested to increase to 15% in year 1 of the biennium and 20% in year 2. For reference, the last many years, the categorical aid for this area has been between 8 and 9%. So in regards to what we know about the state budget, which is very little, we must remind ourselves that the annual change in revenue limit is tied to more than just the per pupil increase that is being proposed. Without an approved state budget, we are still estimating that our revenue limit may end up having a status quo situation, or what we've been saying is a 0-0 under the state budget. This is not a unrealistic thing to consider at this point in the game, especially since 6 of the last 12 years, we have received a $0 per pupil increase in the revenue limit. Madison specifically, we are still experiencing a decline in our enrollment, which is putting downward pressure on our 3-year rolling average, which is the primary multiplier by which the revenue limit is used against. So that being said, under a 0-0 scenario and continued, or at least anticipated, continued declining enrollment in our area, we may see as little as under $3 million in our revenue limit for next year's operations. What I really wanted to spend some time highlighting here, though, in the first part of this presentation tonight is we know we entered the 22-23 budget year with a significant deficit in place as we started to prepare for what this next biennium could look like. So we are starting this budget development cycle with an operational deficit of roughly $7 million. As we look at the revenue sources on the table, we are dealing with as little as $2 million in the under $3 million in the revenue limit, up to a possible $8 million in the revenue limit. That is incorporating the potential $350 per pupil that is in the current state proposed budget. The change in that number is not as much as in previous years, as we are in declining enrollment, but with a $350 in place, the increase is only going to be about $8 million under current estimates. Additionally, we are incorporating our estimates on our salary and wage plan. We are still retaining the highest CPI adjustments that the district has seen over 40 years, frankly, that the nation has seen in 40 years, which puts a significant variance on what we may have to consider for wage deliberations this spring. That could be as low as about $5.6 million and upwards of $24 million, depending on what is ultimately decided upon. We know that for next year, we have a negotiated rate with our health carriers of roughly 3.5% as a rate cap. And the excellence and equity actions we're planning in this year's budget are entirely on ESSER for 1 more year. And the required allowance figure we have right now is roughly $4 million, most of which is going towards the transportation changes we're looking at for next year. So for gap closing strategies, which we'll detail a little bit later tonight, we're going to be going through all budgetary realignment at district level FTE and departmental budgets. We've just completed our staffing and workbook process with our buildings, where we have identified some enrollment-based reductions, which ties again to our revenue stream. And additional realignment of central office to budgets and staffing are ongoing. We are not indicating that this work is done. Over the next several years, we're going to have to determine what types of services we need to prioritize. And what we may need to just end doing altogether in discussions with the board administration. On the table, we have the last year, the ESSER funding for the 23-24 school year, which is of course one-time funding. Many of the projects we entertained last year during this time were signaled to be a 2-year investment. And at the end of those 2 years, if no other sources are identified, those projects would need to end. And finally, as a method of last resort, we may have to indicate use of our fund balance to continue operations while we continue our ongoing realignment work. And then finally, I want to bring back one slide that we've discussed in previous operation work groups, that the change in revenue limit graphed against the change in CPI could not look more different. We are experiencing the largest rate of inflation in over 40 years, and yet even under the currently proposed state budget from the DPI and the governor, the increase that's being requested is far below the rate of inflation for our district. We'll pause for additional discussion.
All right, thank you for that presentation. Questions? Board Member Vandermeulen, I see your hand.
Yes, has there been any new changes since they said that they would triple, that the governor's budget said they would triple the reimbursement rate for 2X charters? Has that changed back?
I can't comment on that at this point. I have not seen any more information on that.
And my second comment is, since the workbooks are done, will that be put into our budget?
Which part, I mean, the staffing FTE are being
Yes.
incorporated right now, yes.
Thank you. That's it.
Other questions? Board Member Simkin.
Just one, I saw the category of allowances or allowance.
Yes.
What does that mean?
In years past, we've used the term required allowance for items in the budget that either cannot be anticipated or that we must. Examples of that in years past would be increases in sub budgets, utilities costs, and in this case, transportation is the largest item.
All right, I have just a couple of questions. On slide 8, it's the one that has the $7 million revenue cap to start. Under the wage and salary plan, the lowest amount there starts at 5.6 million. Can you explain what that includes and why that would be the starting amount?
Yes, so the range shown here anticipates that steps and lanes would be entertained even before a change in the rate schedules themselves.
Okay, so that would include the 2% steps and lanes increase
Correct.
that is historically given.
That's correct.
Okay. And that would cost $5.6 million. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that often this is sort of built into the budget and we don't see that upfront, but just wanted to acknowledge that the 2% average that the board historically has given for this investment is part of the overall wage salary and wage plan that goes into the budget year after year. I think sometimes it gets built in so early that we don't actually see that. And I just want to acknowledge that it is an investment that we choose to make. And again, might want to take a look at that as we move through the process this year. My other question is I have been hearing a narrative and looking at all these numbers, the revenue forecast, best case scenario going up to 8 million, starting with a $7 million gap already, that we already have a $30 million gap. And I've heard that from multiple places and multiple schools. And I don't think we have that yet until we make some decisions on our spending. So what you're saying right now is we have a $7 million gap It'll depend on the revenue coming in, which we're not gonna know for a while.
Correct.
So there's just a tremendous amount of uncertainty with what we're dealing with right now.
Yes, and a lot of the narrative around that extends beyond Madison as well. The board might remember last year, I indicated stories coming out of some of our colleagues in Green Bay already identifying that after ESSER, they will have an immediate $27 million gap in their operational budget based on how they chose to use ESSER funding over the last 2 years. It's something we're probably going to hear from many of our colleagues around the state and across the country. But in Wisconsin specifically, many districts were given only ESSER to work with under a 0-0 budget, which we saw for the last 2 years. So when that became the only source of revenue available to continue what they were doing, that money will expire. And when that money expires, they have little recourse to work with. The attempts here to try and put off that eventuality, but now we're going into the final year of ESSER, we're going to have to entertain some of those practices as well.
Okay, which would actually just grow the gap down the line.
Certainly could.
All right. Thank you, Ross. I appreciate that clarification. Again, it is frustrating to be in this situation with the degree of uncertainty, but I do just want to recognize that we do have options, and I think, you know, conversations are going to have to be around prioritization and what the investments are going to be possible for this year. Okay, any other questions?
Sabian has his hand up.
I'm in my notes and not on Zoom here. All right, Sabian, Board Member Castro.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Ross. I think like pragmatically or materially, what does that delta in the state revenue forecast like mean? You know, so let's say from now until September, we're planning on getting a 2 million revenue increase, but then we find out late September it's actually like 4 million. What does that kind of materially mean for us? Does that mean that, you know, we could try to attempt to hire more staff or attempt to put more of that in compensation? Like, what could we do with that delta?
I think there's two questions there. One is, what is the range at which we could be looking at between now and the state budget? Were everything in the current governor's proposal to pass, we would be in a much better position. The range on that could be as little as $2 million on here to easily over $20 million. However, one thing that we're still entertaining in this development is we can't forget, we're not going into this new year with a balanced budget to start. We're starting in a deficit and we're building our way back to a balanced budget through use of one-time ESSER funding and potentially fund balance. Anything we do receive would not necessarily give us more resources. It would mean less reliance on one-time funding, potentially.
Got it.
All right, Board Member Vandervillen. Board President Moe.
With due respect to everyone at this table, especially Ross, anyone who could put up with my budget questions deserves a medal of his own. But to be 100% honest, I realize the issues. I realize the problems. I just want to be clear. I don't think we could afford to balance our budget on our teachers' backs. And I worry on our teachers. I worry about our staff. I'm hearing teachers who are coming in with saying they have to choose how much of a percentage they're going to work or is their coworker going to take it, the cut. Those kind of things are rather morale destructive behavior. And I think there are many ways to handle a lot of things. One, I think we can reduce on buildings. Two, I would like to see our partnerships again, because I couldn't get it to load. That was me. My computer skills suck. Sorry, pardon the language, but they do. And three, eventually I'd like to look into possibly moving the disability programs at Holzman back to Lapham and selling the building for that. One, I think we bought it for 4.5 million. 1.5 over budget. And I believe that we're putting children back into the least restrictive environment where they could be around non-disabled children, which they've shown aids in learning, would all be ways to cut costs. And that's all I have to say.
Right. Dr. Jenkins, I see your hand up. Do you have something you want a response to Board Member Castro or Board Member Vanderbilt?
No, I do not.
Okay. Then Board President Muldrow, you had a question?
Thanks. So I wanted to ask Ross specifically around targeted and protected allocation. So are there things in our budget that we consider to be targeted and protected allocation?
There are, the best frame of reference I can have is how we allocate some of our staffing. We have certain areas of target allocation that we identify upfront in support of programming such as AVID or ACP coordination, instructional coaches and the like, that are front-loaded in the staffing allocation process. The principals certainly can have input on how those are deployed, but for the most part, we try to see those staffed up front.
Could we apply something like targeted and protected allocation to programming within schools? So I'm going to use the arts as an example. One of the things I've heard is that our arts programming is being kind of chipped away at slowly. There was, I want to say way back in the day, there was a fine arts council or
Fine Arts Task Force.
Fine Arts Task, forget it, Ross. There's longevity for you. And they actually talked about protected allocation for the arts at the elementary school level. And part of that was saying, we're gonna have art teachers who are at multiple buildings, but they can only be at 2, and those buildings have to be within proximity of one another to make it kind of the most efficient thing for the educator. When you're looking at kind of our high school arts programming or middle school arts programming, how, if we are committed to making sure our students have opportunities in the arts, how do we protect that allocation so that we're not seeing arts programming at the secondary level be kind of chipped away at?
So 2 things. The elementary arts allocation is based on specials allocation, which is based on number of sections at those schools. So those in a way are driven based on that already. I do hear you though on the logical pairings, a discussion that I've had many times with previous arts directors in our district, that whenever we have to entertain multiple sites for programs that may have a handful of sections, not picking on this one, but as an example would be orchestra, we want to make sure or try to make sure that those pairings make logical sense, not only geographically, that's not possible. We don't have someone going to force. At the middle schools, we certainly have a point at which all of our building principals meet with their associate superintendents on their instructional design plan and have to provide feedback on their arts allocation. If I could though, there is no specific directive to chip away arts programming right now.
Oh, no, I know.
Okay, just,
I
okay.
think she using that as an
But
example.
I do
That's
think
fair.
I think it's a thing to say explicitly is that we're not actually going to schools and saying we want to scale back the arts.
Correct.
What we're seeing is folks are balancing their allocation and are, looking at their options to do so, and the arts are impacted. All kinds of areas are impacted, right? I think the complicated thing about this for me as a board member is I see us investing in the Summer Arts Academy, which I think is a really great investment. I saw folks come to the board and say, hey, we can get kids high school credit for participating in the arts this summer, our middle school students. So it seems like we're expanding arts in a variety of ways, particularly utilizing summer school. And then somehow that's being undermined during the school year when arts allocation is less from year to year. And for a lot of our schools, it kind of looks like over the course of time, we're offering less and less arts opportunity because this kind of chipping away at arts allocation isn't a new phenomena, didn't just happen this year. And so I'm curious about how we as a board address that. In part because I think our arts educators, it's hard to find out that you're gonna have less of a job that next year than you had this year. I think like there is a sentiment that our commitment to the arts is surface level if we don't acknowledge how the arts are impacted by a reduction in allocation to a specific thing. Particularly at the middle school and high school level. I don't know if this is as much of an issue at the elementary school level. So is there any way for us to speak to how to address that?
I'll bring it back to the rest of the administration for further discussion. Again, I'll just
Yeah. Yeah, right on that point though, Ross, let me have Ms. Green come in and speak to it. And that was well articulated there, Board Member Chair Moldrew, but let's have Cindy Green because she can speak directly to that point because she knows the difference between what we're doing regular and doing summer and trying to meet those needs. If she could speak in, that would help everybody with that.
Yeah, I also have a question.
Good evening, everybody. I think Ross did a great job of explaining it. There's just a few other components that I wanted to add to this. I think that what you bring up, President Muldrow, is really important. How we are investing in the arts and uplifting the arts as a priority, and simultaneously maybe not seeing that play out fully across our schools in the same way. I think one of the challenges that comes into play, well, two things I would say, is course selection. So student interest in terms of what students are desiring for in terms of their courses, especially as they get into 7th grade and beyond, where arts and music become a choice versus a requirement. So I think that's something really important. And I would lift that is one of the reasons we have been talking about changing some of the curriculum and our course offerings and what we're testing out in the summer in order to add to the school year. So I think that's part of what you see happens is having to make decisions about what to offer when and how many sections of each thing to offer. Reality is in Madison, we really do like to go wide and we have many, many, many choices for students, and there's only so much time in the school day. At high school specifically, as you know, we have 7 periods and there's only so many different ways you can have those 7 periods equal the number of opportunities that students want. I do think what I would also say is the referendum work that we are in the process of finalizing at the high school is a great example of where we need to continue to prioritize some of our offerings based on what we as a community have said is important and what we as a community have invested in. But there are complexities to that based on scheduling, based on the number of offerings, and based on the number of students that choose a particular offering and what principals make decisions on in terms of what they run and how many sections of that. I think that we're starting to see that similarly at middle school based on, again, 7th and 8th grade becomes more of some options and how that works with the current schedules.
Cindy, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. Are you saying part of what we're seeing in terms of kind of minor cuts to arts programs at the secondary level is that we actually have a significant number of fewer students who are taking arts-based courses at the secondary level?
Yeah, I think that what you see is principals at the secondary level get what we call flexible allocation. So principals get all of their allocation basically in a singular pot. Like, here's your allocation based on your number of students. And based on that, you start to build out your master schedule and the courses that you are going to offer based on the number of students that choose each particular course. In some places, principals make decisions based on where the student need is, or where the students are voting, and their interest is. We definitely see different patterns as students go into the high school in terms of who is wanting to access certain courses, whether it's CTE, whether it's arts. We see that with culinary, that you have a large number of students interested in culinary. Sometimes you don't see as many students interested in other CTE courses. So principals have to make decisions, again, based on what students are interested in, and then which courses they are going to run. So there is places where there are less students interested in certain courses, and that sometimes becomes where a principal has the kind of flexibility or autonomy to determine which courses they're going to run based on numbers.
Cindy, I greatly appreciate that analysis, and if I can see data that kind of indicates the trends around that, and if those trends kind of align with our investment, I think there's something there to really understand and be able to speak to. The other reaction I have to that is, I don't think, when I was in high school, taking arts classes wasn't actually something that was promoted or celebrated. In fact, those courses were often framed as not necessary to graduate. And though they are some of the classes I feel like I was the most successful in, and some of the classes that gave me the skills to do this job, actually, I think that the lack of encouragement or seriousness around what the arts has to offer could contribute to whether or not our students are taking them at the high school and middle school. So I wanna both see the data that kind of shows those trends, and also think about what we're doing to engage students in artistic opportunities and to value those opportunities in a way that uplifts both the educators who provide those opportunities and the students who thrive within those spaces.
Yeah, I think marketing and advising is huge. The one thing that I would add that is important for everyone to remember is that arts is part of our graduation requirement through our humanities requirement, where students have to take either an art course or a world language course as part of our requirements. So a way just to think about how to uplift it. But I think marketing and advising is critically important for our students across the board, so they know what options they have in front of them and they know what opportunities exist for them. I would agree with that.
Can I get to you in 1 sec?
Sure.
Cindy, I just wanted to follow up on that too. I've been thinking a lot about how the arts fit into what has happened through the pandemic and what students are choosing, right? So it almost seems like we're gonna have to weather a couple of years here where participation in band might rebound because it went down during COVID. So in addition to that analysis, it would be good to see how not being able to play an instrument has affected students' interest in being in band as they progress through middle school, right? The other thing I would like us to take a look at, and I'm not quite sure how to do this, but from a staffing perspective, really looking at when we get down to allocating for the arts on tenths of positions or 2/10 of positions, like what it actually means to have these positions be sustainable for staff. I think it's really hard to move between, 3 schools and feel like you're part of that school community. And I understand that it does have to be worked on by allocation too, but I'm just wondering if we can sort of take a holistic look at it also and say, what does it mean for a music teacher or an art teacher to feel like they're in a job that's sustainable and functional? So I don't know if we can put that as an overlay on this too, as we take a look at it, but I think that might be important in looking, if you have a decrease in middle school band, that is going to eventually affect the high school too. And just knowing how those trends are looking, and if they're starting to increase back, like how we might want to, as Board President Muldrow indicated, protect some level of a baseline allocation while we sort of weather this trend. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally does. And I would say we agree with you. We want staff to feel like they have a home, and it's hard when you're across sites. And I think this this exact conversation plays out in many other areas of school course selection also. So I think it's worth us thinking about overall, right? Because as we are creating these referendum spaces, there's other really important learning spaces that we also have prioritized, which is another group of our staff. So I think we have to have a larger conversation around what we want in terms of offerings for our students across the board, and then how we want to go about that. But definitely hear you and understand in terms of split across multiple sites. And I see Dr. Jenkins' hand up, so I'm going to pause.
Yeah, I do. And then Dr. Jenkins and then Board Member Vandermill.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce that, you know, this is a yes and yes conversation, a lot of what's being said, but more important, I think we have to think about our overall instructional strategies. And I've said day one, arts is big. In particular, coming out of the pandemic, we know that art has been a way too for the social, emotional, mental piece. It's not just the instrumental, it's also the visual arts that we have to look at earlier rather than later, because if we influence it early, it'll carry on later. And I get the piece where we're talking about a 1/10 of something like that when we're doing the allocation, but all these things begin to add up. And I just continue to look in my head and say, what are we valuing here? And if it's going to be arts in a big way, we need to think about it and what's going to be good for our students to address more than just the, if one would call it core content, in which arts I feel like should be a part of the core content, but that's just me from what my experience and what research says, how it could benefit other areas too, by the student having more of a self-image. By participating in art, they gain their confidence, a lot of self-esteem, things of that nature. But I also just want to bring us back to that page 8, Ross, when you start talking about those things and the targeted things and what can we target. But when I was looking at the page 8 that you had up there earlier, Ross, the previous, Jess, if you can go to it, when we started off talking about compensation, that was it, right? We talked about the CPI, and we talked about what Ross is saying, where we are right now. If we start out there, I think it was like 5.8 or 5.6 there, my eyes, but goes up to like 24. My point being is that what's the most we ever given in terms of in our district? What's the most we've ever given the complex challenges we have now? Then when you go to the benefits in terms of what we're estimating there, and then when I start looking at what's in equity, equity is the only area that we don't have a number for, but this is where our priorities start coming into place. And if we have some equity in things that we're talking about, we need to put those things up front and put at least a cost. So when you were talking, Board Member Gomez-Smith, about doing gap analysis, we do the gap analysis together and we find out what is that cost, because you can't really build the budget, meaning do those gap closing strategies without that knowledge of what you're willing to really target and fund. So I just wanted to put that in there for us as well. We got to think about what choices we're making today and how we're going to cover it long term.
And then Member Vandermill, you have one more question?
Yes, more statement than question. But Ross, is there a way also, I know we can't prioritize them. I get that. However, having 40+ people in a gym class, I'm worried about safety wise. I'm sorry, but there are only so many balls that are aimed at someone's head who's being bullied before you start worrying about concussion protocol. Number 2, I want to know what we're doing to promote staff morale when it comes to allocations, especially. Is there a way we can add to it? Is the principal the only one who makes the decision, or can we add to the ability to make the decision so that allocations aren't split? Who makes the allocation split decision? Does the principal, does admin, does the board?
Principals make most of the decision in regards to what those art splits look like.
I just don't like breaking up what we have, and I think I keep getting emails from students who have said, I plan to go to college. I am majoring in this language and now I want to study this language, and we no longer have Latin anymore. And I've seen that multiple times, or whatever class. I'm just worried if we keep doing that, we keep messing with the allocations, especially on languages, we're going to make some of our students possibly ineligible or have a much harder time qualifying for our four-year colleges and even our two-year colleges. So I think we have to consider that. That's it.
The last thing I do want to highlight is, as long as this budget slide is up here, number 2 under the gap closing strategies, we do have to recognize that we do have to align our staffing and workbooks to the declining enrollment. I mean, we made a strategic decision during COVID to not make significant adjustments, and we do have to align the staffing with the board policy and the staff, you know, I don't want to say needed because that's, you know, a priority and a perception thing, but we do have to align the staffing to having had enrollment declines over the last 3 years. And it's a delicate balance.
May I make a request, Chair?
Board member Nicholas?
Yes, I apologize. I didn't even see your hand.
I just got it up there. Yeah, to your point, board member Gomez Schmidt, we knew that with declining enrollment, at some point, we were gonna have to make some of the hard adjustments that were necessary around staff allocation. I think the challenge that I'm hearing is that because there have been so many staff vacancies or unfilled roles, then this idea of having to cut when you already have staff who have been feeling that burden and that toll, you know what I mean, because they're short-staffed, it makes it a harder concept to understand or appreciate right now, right? Because it's not like you were working with a full staff, and then having to, you know, reduce. You're already working with a reduced staff, and then hearing more about more cuts. So I think that part, which isn't necessarily directed at you, Ross, I think it's just it's a challenging reality that we're hearing from staff out in schools right now. And I know that our allocation process is something that, you know, is worked on with a lot of thought in terms of what goes out to schools and how they have to make some of the adjustments. I think one of the things to board member Vandermeulen that our board may want to come back to is we do have a class size policy. And one of the things that we heard, or I'll just speak for myself, that I heard out on the listening sessions is this idea that we have a policy right now that says in unified arts or electives, you can go up to 40. We heard this from high school staff, middle school staff, like that can be very difficult to teach within. I don't think that's gonna be, we're gonna be able to adjust or address that for this, right, this budget. But I've heard enough examples of how challenging that is, that it may be something that we want to come back to very proactively for our next budget cycle.
That's actually what I was gonna ask for is, I know we can't do it this budget. I think we can do it next one, and I think it'd be helpful to see the workbooks in advance. So that way we can work collaboratively on it, because 40 kids in gym, I'm sorry. I was raised by a coach who was once a gym teacher and mom who has a master's in physical education. I can tell you 40 kids running around in gym, playing dodgeball, for example, is absolute chaos personified. And very simply, we can make sure that the class size policies are met. I think that's going to do a heck of a lot, not just for our students and learning, but also at staff morale, because you have less stressed out teachers.
Thanks. And just to remind everybody that we do have the priority of the academic core classes and those class sizes too. So alongside the specials and the arts, taking a look at the overall class size policy too. Board member Castro, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment that I recall seeing this figure at last month's operation work group when right before before or after workbooks were sent out that, even with the realignment, we are still maintaining comparable to prior years, adult to student ratios in a building. And so we are maintaining those ratios. How those FTE are allocated is a local decision made by school communities and the building principals. And that's the level of discretion and local context that I think should be respected, and is given for a reason. And I just, to piggyback off of Board Member Nichols, there is just a kind of an issue with, a position being funded but not filled. And so, the difference between there being a vacant position and a position being, and someone trying to get that position filled all year versus permanently ending that position and freeing up dollars elsewhere, or if that makes sense. So those are my 2 comments.
All right, thank you. I'm going to move us on to the next section. Ross.
So thank you, Tracy, for your patience. I did want to highlight the next part of the presentation tonight as regards to the historical look back of our benefits package. So I'll leave it all over to Tracy now.
Tracy.
Good evening. This slide historically has been the same, except for if you look at the bottom for 23-24, we are in the 3rd year of a 3-year cycle regarding healthcare benefits. So this upcoming year for 23-24 should be at 3.5%. These numbers were updated, so you'll see that most of our active employees have GHC. So the ratio is 72% to 28%. They go with Dean. Point of service is that second column, and you can see those numbers. If you break it out by percent wise, most of our active employees are in the family for both Dean and GHC. And then at the bottom, we show the retirees under the age of 65 and those numbers respectively as well. And enrollment by employee type is the graph to the right. Mainly the big blue part would be the teachers, and then respectively for the other units. And this graph just shows utilization. There isn't much change. And then Ross, you can help me with, under here is at the 65, under 65 retirees. The number for Dean and GHC changed only slightly, but everything else is the same. So Dean is at 89% and GHC is at 99%. And you can see it says every dollar in premium, 90 cents are paid in claims plus 10 cents in administrative costs. So that hasn't changed much at all. And I just wanted to put a caveat in here in that we will be coming back with an update, but our health insurance is a key part of our employee benefits plan. And it's also a very good recruitment plan that we use. Ross, you can slap my hand if this is wrong, but when we've met with other districts, we have the lowest insurance rate, and it is a hook. So when we do recruitments, they are very cognizant of that. Previous negotiations, the impact was approximately, and Ross can talk to this number, 1.7 mil to maintain our healthcare package. And like I said, we're in the 3rd year of a 3-year contract. So we will be working with M3 to start negotiations upcoming very, very, very soon. And so I think that's everything. The district, like I said, is in the phase for negotiations, but nothing has changed between Dean and GHC are the only 2 that we have.
President Muldrow.
So I want to thank you all for doing this work and bringing this information to the board. A few years ago, we voted on sticking with GHC despite GHC being $9 million more expensive than the other competing option, because we wanted to ensure stability for the folks working for us. That was in the midst of a global pandemic. I think we're in a really different place at this point. I also think we have to grapple with the reality of our budget. The other recent thing that we did was we had 3 insurers at one point, and we actually moved away from our most popular insurer in order to go down to 2. I think that were we to engage in a competitive bidding process, this board would have to pay a lot greater attention to the bottom line than we did in that last conversation, given the constraints of our budget. When do we go engage in a bidding process with insurers again?
So we want to start as early as possible. So we're working with M3 to look at when we can start those negotiations, but they're starting as soon as possible. So probably looking at April, is that right, Brad? Being in April, starting as.
Can I ask what kind of analysis we apply to providers beyond the scope of services and beyond kind of the price points of any given package? Are we looking through an equity lens for our LGBTQ staff and the needs that are specific to that population? Are we looking specifically at how our insurer works with, folks who are Spanish speaking, how our insurer works with folks of color, Black people? What are we looking for beyond kind of the scope of services and price points when we analyze whether or not a vendor is the right option for us in terms of healthcare?
That's a good question. So that has come up, especially not as deep as the LGBTQIA+ community, but we do talk about looking at the customers that they serve, whom they serve. There's a big push for languages as far as translation, offering that for the customers that they do serve, also to the services that they provide. So we do ask those questions when we go into it about, especially equity and inclusion and what that looks like. We discuss their policies to look at that as well into these negotiations.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. I will say, as an out member of the LGBTQ community, I can give a shout out to GHC and the work that they've done specifically around supporting LGBTQ folks throughout our community. And as a Black woman in Madison, Wisconsin, when I look at things like the infant mortality rate for us as a community, when I look at things like the maternal mortality rate for us as a community, there are things that stand out to me and give me incredible concerns for my own personal safety and the safety of, women who look like me. And so I hope as we're factoring in, the scope of services and price points, we're also bringing an equity lens that echoes our priorities throughout the district and make sure that no matter what you look like or what language you speak, what disabilities you have, that you're getting health care that serves you and meets your needs. And if we're not able to get that, or if we see multiple vendors that have specific blind spots, what are we doing to work with them to reconcile those issues so that the folks who work for us get the healthcare that they need and deserve?
Absolutely. And M3 is very astute about that and working on that. They've been working with Madison Metropolitan School District for quite some time. And so they're very astute to those options and those needs. Yeah, that as well.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. That's it for my questions.
Okay. Board Member Vandermeulen.
Yes, as we're talking on diversity and inclusion on disability policy, I would like not just on, most times disability is only mentioned in 2 areas, life insurance or long-term care. And although both of those are important, I'd like to focus on us not being dead or being perpetually injured, but actually what the deductibles are, because oftentimes individuals with disabilities who are working full-time often cannot qualify for the Medicare that is offered on disability coverage. So since they don't qualify for that, it often means they have either a higher copay or they have to do co-pay. that can, or take on additional insurance. Is there a way in a program to make sure that we are providing our individuals with disabilities with not just physical, but also mental health, with actual options? Because it's not just difficult to find healthcare. Trying to find a dentist if you're on Badger Care is impossible. It is literally impossible because there is no dentist in Dade County currently. There was one, I think he retired, who takes Badger Care for dental. That's a problem. So I just want to make sure people have as many options as they can. We can't fix the world, but we can try and make it better in this one little way.
Board Member Nichols.
Okay. Two clarifying questions. On the slide that shows kind of the renewal, right? That one. Can you just clarify, the district is in the beginning phase of negotiations for 24-25. Do we negotiate 1 year at a time, or do we try to get multi-years kind of fixed in, if locked in rather, if we can?
Yes. I looked at
The latter.
Yes, is that we try to do multiple years in one negotiation.
Okay, so the negotiations for the 24-25 school year could be the first year of a multi-year. Okay, great. Thank you for that. And then the slide right before that. The point, let me just make sure I understand that. The point of this slide, I thought, is that what we're looking for in some aspects is a healthcare provider who is spending as much money, as much of the premium back on the services delivered and less on their own overhead. And there's a certain ideal place for that. And is that why it's showing Dean is in the green and GHC is still there, or what is this
Yes,
slide?
but it's actually more an indication that the money we're paying in for the actual healthcare we provide our employees, the full dollar is being utilized in between the two areas listed, between paid costs and administrative costs. It's another way of also saying that what is our loss ratio for the dollars we're paying in healthcare? As a healthcare provider, they would want to see these lines go much further back on the scale, because then they're seeing potential for profit margin. As a private entity, most are. What this actually says, though, is they're not actually generating much money from us here. Most of the money we're paying in is going back to claims, mostly due to our health experience, our staff.
Okay. Thank you for framing it that way. So then can we just stay here, and can you talk to me a little bit about what is happening with the retiree experience, since they're,
Well,
I don't know how to read that.
in short, the utilization of healthcare dollars for those plans, even at their higher cost, we're spending way beyond what we're paying in for those staff and
Oh.
healthcare costs.
Okay, got it.
Which is typical for employers that offer bridging coverage between retirement age and Medicare.
Got it. And this is just a question based on a comment or a couple of comments that I've heard, at least in some of our board meetings, around our substitute teachers. So do they have access to any of the healthcare, or is it I don't know. I just remember hearing a comment. Some do. Okay.
Numbers I need to.
I don't need exact numbers. I was just wondering about like who has access to healthcare in the substitute.
You have
Kind of
to do
category.
80% attendance is what the person testified to, that you had to do 80% attendance in order to be able to qualify for insurance if you were on long-term shell.
Okay,
Don't recall the regular subrate, just call it long-term.
okay. Thank you.
Is that accurate, Tracy?
I'd have to look into it.
Oh, okay. I was just saying, formal comment. Just, yeah, if we could follow up with that, that would be great. All right, let's.
Go on.
Yep, let's move forward. We have, just to reground us here, we have the budgetary realignment and then we still have the HR review after that.
So not to, so to kind of recenter is, one of the last topics we wanted to cover tonight is that the district is committed to identification of not only reductions in the budget, but realignment where we know we need to make room for operating expenses. We've all heard tonight the gaps that are before us and the potential revenues that we can't rely on today, at least not with current information. So we've completed the list on the next slide is indicative of what the administration has put together for reductions in the 23-24 budget out of central office positions. This identification is approximately $2.7 million of cost. I do need to highlight the excellent work of not only the administrative team to identify this, but I also want to acknowledge publicly that reduction of these costs was not a simple task. These will reduce services, not only within central office, but how the type of oversight we're able to give our buildings. But the $2.7 million is inclusive of 22 FTE from vacant and some filled positions. We are going to continue identifying further areas of realignment to discuss as we move forward. But the list shown here is identifying the costs inclusive of any FTE of the departments listed. I do not have explicit detail on what positions on this slide for reasons that some of the staff members involved are in the process of being notified of these reductions. But these will be reductions effective July 1st in the current budget we have in development. One other thing I want to highlight, and we talked about this a little bit earlier tonight, is that the 23-24 school year represents the final year of the ESSER funding we have available to us. For those that are tuning in or are not aware of what ESSER funding was, beginning with the pandemic in March of 2020, 4 distinct awards were given to school districts across the country. We've been calling this collectively the ESSER federal grants. The ESSER 3 award of which is the final, was awarded during the 2022 cycle last year. And those funds must be used up by next fall. I'm sorry, yes, by next fall of 2024. So as we set forward with the development for the 23-24 school year, I want to revisit some of the items we discussed last spring in our original ESSER plan. We identified at that point that the ESSER projects identified on these next couple of slides were to have some FTE inclusive of their projects being run between the 22-23 and 23-24 school year. There are additional non-personnel, including some that we mentioned this evening, including Summer Arts Academy and larger curriculum purchases. Last spring, we went through the curriculum adoption process for K-5 literacy adoption, and we've currently had discussions as recently as last week in regards to middle school curriculum adoption. All of these items, which are tied to the ESSER federal grants, have been collected here. I do not have finalized dollar amounts for this, only because I'm still finalizing what FTE and what dollar amounts will carry over effective July 1st. I do want to highlight that when we do get to the budgetary vote later this spring, that the amount we're voting on is going to be based on estimated carryover of some of these items. Some of these purchases may involve some prepayment, which we'll be discussing in the May and June board consent agenda items. But by the time we're done, the ESSER plan we vote on this fall will be inclusive of all remaining ESSER dollars available to us at this point. I don't want to see, I'm sorry. I do want to at least identify that the ESSER projects on this page, again, are aligned to the 5 major areas of the federal grant: addressing long-term school closure, outreach for special populations, mental health services and supports, and preparedness in response to COVID-19. It may seem strange that we're still discussing preparedness in response to COVID-19 when so many of the federal discussions are about relaxing, eliminating, or turning this off, but these were what the funds were originally for. So we're trying to do the best we can to align a lot of these services for students and staff using these federal dollars while they are available. With that, just want to quickly highlight next steps. Of course, we are in March right now, but we are in the process of preparing our initial budget balancing efforts as we go into April, again, with very limited state data. We will continue our discussions in our work groups and our regular board meetings on any equity projects or questions the board members may have on information we saw tonight. And the major April budget update will be at the operations work group next month. After that point, we'll be opening up to our May and June timeframe where we have our community feedback process, and we'll continue to make adjustments leading up to the June preliminary vote. With that, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Any questions on this portion of the presentation? Board Member Castro.
Thank you. I'm wondering if Ross or someone else from this department can talk about some of the things we may be losing with the cuts related to student and staff support and student services, as a good proportion of the cuts are concentrated there.
The cuts identified in those areas were in large part from vacant positions. The programming costs were mostly FTE based in those situations. I don't have the exact position numbers I'll be able to share tonight.
Okay.
All right, other questions?
I have one on what's coming up procedurally, but not on this.
Oh, okay.
No,
On the budget process, what's coming?
no,
up?
on HR.
Oh, okay, that'll be next.
That's,
Any other questions on the budget?
Yes.
Yes, Board President Muldrow.
Strategically, as we reduce positions at central office, I know some of that is a reduction in vacancies and some of that will be positions that people currently have. Because we have a staffing shortage, are we looking at the skill sets of the people who are already here and putting them into vacant positions? So maybe, okay,
Absolutely.
thank you. That's really reassuring and nice to hear, and thank you for saying it.
Any other questions? My only question is on that equity investment list and what has been funded under ESSER. Are the things, I mean, is there gonna be a prioritization? I know that there's work being done to see if there is additional funding or grants or something that can be applied for to continue some of these programs. When will an analysis or information be coming back on? I'm guessing it'll be over the course of the next year since it goes through 2024.
It'll be over the course of the next year. We've asked existing department leaders to start to do metric analysis of the projects that they did this year, what worked, what didn't, and specifically how they're going to transition some of those programs as they are likely to not have funding after the next year.
All right, sounds good. And then just one last comment, noticing that again, on that budget slide 8 that we started off in the beginning that had that $7 million gap. That was created by the funding investment that the board made in hourly staff. And we had been anticipating a, strategic realignment to sort of close that gap. Well, just recognizing that we got to 2.7 million in that closing strategy. So we're still like 4.3 along the way towards that, right?
Actually further along than that, because the 2.7 represents only central office reductions.
Okay.
The enrollment-based reductions that we were talking about earlier in the work process are making up a considerable amount of that balance.
Okay.
Yeah, if I met last month when we had the reductions across the district, I think those are factored into that figure as well.
Okay, thank you.
may I ask a preliminary question on HR?
On HR, yes, I do think Dr. Jenkins might want to comment before we start this section and we invite.
I just wanted to know if the report is now public or not, the full report, because it says confidential on it. I want to know if that's still there.
Okay, let's ask when we get into the presentation.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
It's great.
We'll definitely set that question up. Thank you, Ross, for the presentation. Thank you, Tracy, for the information on HR. And with that, we'll move into the HR review. And so I don't know who is joining us, but feel free to join us at the front of the table. And then Dr. Jenkins, as they're getting settled, is there something that would you like to start us off or give us some context? We did receive a summary of an HR review that you presented to the board with the consultant from Whipley 2 weeks ago. And so this is kind of follow-up plus additional work that's being done in HR.
Yeah, and let me just start off first of all saying thank you. First of all, even agreeing to, we were going to do the HR review and then having it presented publicly like we did, and the questions being asked, and then we knew that we were going to come today to have the opportunity to go a little bit deeper. So this is what we're hoping to do today. If you have further questions, and then we'll go into that today, but then beyond today, as well as we've already begun to think about some of the recommendations in the 18-month timeline that was laid out in terms of which these things should be accomplished. Coming in, we knew that we had some historical, I would even put it as challenges in HR that's been around for some time. And we wanted to make sure that we did address those challenges that we knew that they were there. But we wanted to make sure we had an outside view. So that's why we did the HR review to kind of confirm or deny those things that we thought were there. You heard from the report, the high level overview from Barb, that there are some things that we could do. And there are some things you'll hear later on from Ms. Carradine that we have done, in fact, but we're just eager to get to it, working collaboratively, as was stated last year, that we wanted to go back in and work at HR. We knew it was a historical time, but at the same time, we need to take care of the low-hanging fruit that we knew that we had in HR so that we can be better positioned for next year. So at this time, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Carradine, and she will talk about kind of some of the progress made today and the report itself, and then we'll talk about our next steps even beyond this. Okay, so Ms. Carradine, if you could.
Jesse, you gonna drive for me? Sure. Thank you. Good evening. Before I get started, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I have some team members with me that will be going over, they will be helping me with this presentation. I have Lisa Mortensen, who's the Director of Employee Relations. I have Jennifer Trendle, who is the Director of Payroll. I have Kurt Rose, who's the Director of HR Operations. And I have Brad Whedon, who is the Director of Benefits. All right, next slide. I want to begin by saying that as we talk about this report, the strategy and focus that HR uses in every committee that we work with, including the Handbook Committee, is levers 2, 3, and 4, which is we will invest in people, we will streamline priorities, and we will plan for the future. That's what we lean in with for the strategic framework, goals, and strategy. But an overview of the human resources updates. So we've had a monumental year. We've been hiring, we'll go through these numbers a little bit more, but we've hired over 807. We had over 807 positions for teachers, and we've hired over 700 to date. We are looking to, a lot of our work is working on hiring, making sure that staff have what they need when they walk into the buildings, making sure that we follow our handbook processes and procedures, working on streamlining the process to make it more user-friendly and easier, moving as they move through the process and get into the buildings to get in front of our scholars. As Dr. Jenkins stated about this HR review, so over the last almost 2 years now, when I got here, we started looking at processes and procedures, looking at how the processes were run, what could we do differently. When I came in, we were hiring staff as well within HR, trying to get back up to par. Currently, we have 30 employees within human resources, not 31. We have one position that will be ending next year. That was a temporary. And so we do have a lot of processes and procedures that we're reviewing, we're streamlining. And I want to say up front before we get started, thank you to the board for helping us achieve that in some of the consent agenda items that you've helped move forward for us to move this along. Next slide. This is just an example of some of the things that we have been working with Dr. Anderson on. This is an example of our key performance areas that we are looking at and keeping track of. And this is just one of them. This is employee relations, but we have one for each of the departments within HR that we will be tallying and keeping track of our progress. Just the overview. So in the report too, that review that you given, it talks about our systems that we use, the processes, the program we have. It was last year I talked about we went from 2 applicant tracking systems to 1. So we use Cornerstone, and Cornerstone is also the system that we use for our PLLD, Professional Learning and Leadership Development. Field print is what we use for background checks. Concentra is what we use for our physicals, our pre-employment physicals. EDC is new. That's gonna help with our retiree benefits and like spending. M3 is the consultants that we use. We brought them up before to talk about benefits. They're our consultants on all things insurance and working with benefits. Frontline is what we use for our substitute tracking, but we also bought a package on there that deals with data and data analysis. And we did that in part because a lot of other surrounding school districts use Frontline, and they use the data system that they offer. And then App Garden, you heard that before, that's what we use for our volunteer background checks, but we use that in collaboration. We don't do the background checks for the volunteers, but we do use that in collaboration with them. All right. Next up, you'll be hearing from our directors of each department.
Thank you for having us this evening. I did want to point out that Munis is our HRIS system, and that was not included on the previous slide because we have had that system since 2012. It wasn't anything that the board has funded within the last 2 years, other than a continuation of having that software system in place. And that is our system of record for payroll and human resources. So payroll in the last 2 years has rolled out employee self-service, which improves visibility for pay stubs, pay rates, benefit leave time. Employees can access their W-2s and other tax information. It's really streamlined it and taken away the manual process of handling a lot of paper. We've conducted payroll trainings in Kronos and in Munis for new supervisors and new payroll processors. We do that as needed and as requested. We've updated and documented our processes that have changed as systems have changed, and we are migrating from an AS400 system to an app system. And payroll always focuses on compliance with federal, state, local, and handbook pay policies.
Thank you. So now first, thank the board for approving the consent agenda for UBC and helping them with retirees use their HRA money for other things besides insurance. It's gonna be a huge benefit for them. That's been asked for since I've started, and even before that, people are for that change. So I appreciate that. We're also working on a leaves enhancement that's gonna help the leaves process go a lot smoother and a lot more communication. Working with IT since this past summer to get this off the ground. Hopefully we'll have it ready to go for next school year to have them the process be faster and then be able to see the process as it goes through. I've hired a few new staff members. They're going to help bolster my staff to work in the leaves area as well as retirees. I've also hired a risk advisor that's going to help initiate some more school safety implementations, as well as keeping staff advised of different initiatives that the district has put in place. My staff also attends new principal trainings, new teacher hirings. We also go to schools for open enrollment and are available for any questions that staff may have throughout the school year regarding their benefits.
Thank you for having us here tonight. My name is Lisa Mortensen. Employee relations. Employee relations covers a wide net of areas. We are intending to help coach and guide leadership. We serve as facilitators for change. We partner with leadership to address performance concerns, conflict management, and disciplinary and non-disciplinary actions. And we have a strong partnership with legal services to address workplace bullying, Title IX, and non-discrimination policy violations. We have prepared metrics from May of 2022 to current. And I want to give you a breakdown by unit of some of the status categories that we have been measuring. We've been measuring discipline, performance management, coaching, consultation, administrative leave, grievance, letters of expectation, and workplace bullying. You can see by the breakdown of the units within MMSD, we have had close to 1,000 cases. And it is a fluid We have several cases and a lot of intake daily with this. We are continuing to create processes and practices that are equitable, fair and consistent, and in compliance with board documents, with the employee handbook, and with employment law, both federal and state. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Kurt Rose, and I serve as the Director of Operations. But before I talk about the structure and staffing, I just want to make sure everyone knows what teams are a part of the operations teams, because we're a little bit more diverse than when you hear the others, you kind of know who's there. But for us, we are the analyst team, the substitute office team, and then we also have the employment specialist and the HRIS manager. So there is a good set of different individuals that work on the operations team. So just a little bit about our internal team. We, as Tracy has already stated, we have 30 positions in our department. Currently, we have a few vacancies. This, as we talk about all the time when we talk to you all about recruitment and vacancies, how fluid the numbers are. We literally turned in this information last week and we have different numbers to report back. So we do have our recruiter that is vacant. I do want to thank the board and those who have been discussing that particular position. I know it had been on hold for a while, but we are actively recruiting for it again as the need is large. So we will be moving forward with that. We currently have a vacancy of 1.5 analysts. So we have a couple of analysts that we are recruiting for currently. They're still looking for a benefits specialist. We had a new employment specialist start today. So we did have 2 employment specialist vacancies on the team, but one started today. And then we have another one that we're recruiting for. Our risk manager has been hired, and so we have hired that. So from the time we turn this in till then. And then we do have our front desk person who works out there at the front desk that we will be recruiting for. So just a little bit of information about our current staff as a whole. Most of the department has been in the department under 4 years. There aren't many people that you will come across in the HR department who have been there for a very long time. We have a few, and they are our gurus of knowledge, of historical knowledge. However, we do have the vast majority of us are very new to the district in itself. And so they're walking into that. We also learned that historically, the office has operated in a space where individuals were responsible for certain things, and there wasn't a lot of cross-training within our office. And so as we have had turnover and new people come in, it has been imperatively clear that we have to focus on cross-training. So we have been having conversations and discussions on how to weave in that cross-training into our current structure since last summer or so. And so we've been working on doing that and cross-training across teams so that everyone has the ability to pitch in when we do get into those mountains of work. I know that was one of the things that was pointed out in the HR review as something that needs to take place. We have already been working on that prior to having a discussion with those. And then most of the HR or most of the information within HR are interdependent. And so there's been more process documentation and updates to systems. So all of our teams work interdependent with each other. And then all of the things that we do amongst the operations group specifically is interdependent on all of our colleagues and staff and teammates outside of HR. And so a lot of the work that we do is based on the information that we have to receive from the schools, from the departments, in order for us to continue moving forward with doing our things and making sure that everybody's paid appropriately, the records are together. A lot of that depends on the information that we receive from our colleagues and counterparts. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit on the technology side. As Tracy talked about, we have about 29 different programs that deal with HR processes. Over the past year, or at least for sure, since I've come in June, we've been looking at Munis specifically. We've also been looking at Cornerstone specifically. So when we started taking a look and peeling back the layers, there's a number of things that we can utilize to help streamline our processes and to provide a better source of technology for us to do things better and more operationally, I guess you could say, with the times, right? So we've been having very pointed discussions and conversations with Munis as well as with Cornerstone to determine how we can get those two systems to talk to each other. Part of the barrier that they talked about in the audit was how we are not utilizing technology and the breakdown of communication amongst the group and how people aren't really they're getting different answers from different people. We talked about that from a customer service standpoint. We talked about that from a technology standpoint. Making sure that we're focusing in on the best parts of these products and how they can assist us in moving forward and streamlining that is our number one thing. So we've been working on that already on the months leading up to the review. What we have found is that Munis currently right now we're going through a, what is it? It's a, you want to call it, but we're updating it. We're moving it to the next level of upgrade. We'll call it upgrade, whatever you want to call it. Migration. Sorry, that's what
Upgrade, and then say says, let me.
upgrade, but our technological people have been using fancier words, so we're trying to keep up. But ultimately, we're bringing Munis up to speed. So the Munis that we're using is a little outdated, so we don't have the top things that we need in order to make it talk with everything else. And so we're working currently to get everything together to move that forward and get that up to date. In addition to that, we're working with Cornerstone to streamline our recruitment processes. So part of the recruitment process and information that we learned from the recruitment season of last year was that people felt like they didn't know where they were in the pools, they didn't get the proper communication. That was all of the information that we were receiving. What we are doing currently is working on how to ensure that those notifications are automated within the system. They're there. How to ensure that those communications are going on as dispositions are changed. And then also working on how to get Cornerstone and Munis to be able to talk with each other and share information. That will also assist in the issue with people having multiple answers of things because you look in this system, you see one thing, you look in that system, you see the other thing. So making sure that Munis is our system of record and has all the accurate data is important. So we're making sure that all of us are talking to each other. Next slide. This is just a lot about our system ownership. I talked a bunch about that in the last part, so we can skip that slide. All right, so then we'll jump over to hiring. This is a summary of the hiring that has been comparative since 2017. So 740 teachers were hired this last hiring season. So we're at a 91.7% fill rate. 236 SEAs, we're at an 86.76% fill rate. 101 custodians, putting us at an 85.29% fill rate. 102 in food service at an 82.26% fill rate. And then supportive education employees, which is our C unit, 88.89% fill rate, and our professionals, 88% and 50% fill rate for trades. It does not include the new positions. There were 55 of them that were created through the ESSER and grants, and there is a table down here that has our current vacancies broken down by school level, where we are now. So in elementary, we have 29 vacancies with a total of 1,332 teachers for a 2.18% vacancy total. In middle school, we have 14 vacancies with 553 total teachers for a 2.53% vacancy level. And then in high school, we have 19 vacancies with 657 total teachers for a 2.89%, meaning, and then we have our district-wide teachers that are at the district-wide area. We have 5 vacancies with 118 of those currently with a 4.24%. So ultimately that total is 67 vacancies in the teacher unit with 2,660 total teachers for an overall 2.52% vacancy percentage. So to look at those numbers in that particular way. This is a map of our hiring process. And so it talks about the applicant status and how it moves through. This is just a visual that we give out so everybody understands how it goes. I can talk about it very quickly here. You go from a new submission to in review. In review, we're taking a look at qualifications, your resume, doing those pieces, and then you moved over to interviewing to interview you for those qualifying pieces. Normally the hiring manager is doing that, and then they're communicating back with the HR office on who they want to move forward, who they're selected. You're then not selected, and or selected. And those that are selected, we are then having to go in and do what is considered a rec form. What a rec form is information about the position. It gives you details about all of that information. That right now is a manual process. And that drives the ability to move you from an applicant pool into being active for onboarding. So what we're working on in the technological space is the best way to best streamline that and make that more technological so that it can move quicker. And then after you have gone through the rec form place, you're in the onboarding. We talked about onboarding over the time frame here about how we've had some challenges around onboarding. So we started working directly with Cornerstone and figuring out how to make our onboarding more streamlined, technological, and specifically technologically based. One piece that is a big barrier for our onboarding currently is that individuals have to come in and physically bring their hiring paperwork down to Doyle, turn it in, and then that information is entered manually into a system so that that can then be entered into the payroll system and do all those pieces to set you up. That drives the B number, that drives your ability to have an email, that drives your ability to have a machine, a technological machine, and it drives all of those pieces. So when we don't have all of our pieces of onboarding completed because of our manual processes, you see the downstream effects of how people are not set up to succeed when they walk through the building. So if you remember last year, we talked about, everyone was saying the onboarding is taking too long. We need to get bodies in schools. We need to be able to do that. So we worked on we did an onboarding process where we were allowing the criminal background checks to come through, but the other pieces could be done at a later date. What we found over that process is that all of those downstream effects in regards to equipment, technology, emails, all of those pieces were then magnified even larger because we had a number of individuals who didn't have all the pieces together that needed to take place. And so then it became a bigger issue from saying like, yes, we need to get the people in there. Great, we got them there, but now they don't have what they need to do in order to be successful. So what we're working on currently is our onboarding program and digitizing that. So our HRIS manager has been the project manager of that particular project. She started working on that as an analyst and working in connection with me. And so what we have been doing is streamlining that particular situation. Is that on the next slide? Sorry.
Next slide.
Next slide.
Next.
Yeah.
Next.
It's far away. We'll get there.
The next one.
Yeah.
One more.
One more. Sorry. No,
One
more.
There you go.
So I wouldn't have told you to move the slides, but we're there. So we're working on those particular on this particular rollout. It is to roll out in May. So we are in phase 2 of the rollout. We have already built the system. We are testing the system now to ensure that it works. In order for us, we had hopes of rolling it out in April with MegaPulse. However, when we learned that Munis needed to be upgraded, there are some key components that Munis needs to be able to talk to Cornerstone that we have to be cognizant of. So we are rolling out that onboarding process in May. The best part about this is that as we go into the hiring peak for this next hiring season, we should start seeing a lot of people starting onboarding in June, specifically because if you are starting in August, you can't do your onboarding for earlier than 90 days prior. So a lot of people should start onboarding in June as we are moving through MegaPulse, and that will be an excellent piece that will have a digitized onboarding piece that will move you through that onboarding process. So it should be a much smoother process than what we had last year. And if you can go back, I'm sorry to put you back on the slides. If you can go backwards for me. Right here. You go back. Yep. All right. And then the last slides I want to update on is our sub office. I know that the sub conversation has been an intense one over this year about what we're doing from the sub office standpoint, how we have that. And so we have our sub office is made up of 3 people. We have 2 clerks, 2 sub clerks, and then 1 lead. Our sub clerks manage a lot of our relationships with the schools and working with the secretaries, and then as well as a lot of our frontline work. And then our lead is managing that work and then doing a lot of problem solving in the background and assisting with some more of the higher level things that come through the sub office. During the past year, there's been a number of changes that have occurred regarding the application process. So the application was shortened for retirees to make it more easier for them, so that we could be more attractive to retirees that want to come back and contribute to the district from a sub perspective. The district has a work requirement that substitutes must work one time per semester. So understanding that we have people that sign up, and if they may only work one day in the semester, they're considered an active sub. All you need to do is work one day in the semester. That is our process. So during this past year, the district has been able to sustain the numbers of substitutes. And for the last 3 years, the district has hired 1,829 substitute teachers. So in 2021, there were 402 hired. In 2021, 2022, 730. And last school year, or this current school year, 2022, 2023, we have hired 697 substitute teachers. Currently, the district has 480 actively working substitutes. So again, when you look at those qualifications of what makes you an active sub, that means 480 of those substitutes have worked at least one day in the fall semester to be considered active. And then for 2022, the district had a total of 341 applicants and 207 hires. And if you look at that breakdown there, it goes through the months where we had applicants and how many were hired. With the peak of hires coming in August, right before the start of the school year, we hired 80 individuals and 69 in September, right at the beginning of the school year. And as you can see, it's tapering down to 27, 14, and 3. But that is the numbers from the substitute side of the house. Additionally, we have a few vacancies that we've been covering. And so talking to that cross-training piece, the sub team has assisted us in learning the licensing side of the house. And so what we've been doing over the last few weeks is we've had some SEA licensing pieces that we are trying to fix and make sure that all of our folks can renew and have their proper licenses. And so our sub lead has been running, actually just got back from that. So we run those labs on Mondays where we have our sub SEAs, or excuse me, our SEAs who need licenses to come in, and we help walk them through how to do their process, how to do their application, and help them pay for the application on site. We've been scheduling those. We've been doing them for 3 weeks. The first week we had 18 people show up. The second week, we had 20 people show up, and today was our busiest day. We had 47 individuals that we helped get licensed. So we have helped get a total of 85 licenses completed, whether that's a new application or renewal, over the last 3 weeks from a licensing standpoint. So that has been an awesome opportunity for us to showcase the cross-training in our office and us showing up where we have those vacancies and filling in those gaps.
We do them every Monday.
Yes, we do them every Monday. So at the rate we're going, hopefully we'll report a huge number next week, Monday, because the word of mouth is coming and people have been very grateful of attending those. And then lastly, on the recruitment side, we've held our own fairs that we have hosted, and then we've also attended some big fairs. So this graph is documenting all the fairs that we've had going on up until January 23rd of 2023. So we attended the Central Hispano Fair, where we contacted 15 candidates, 6 applied, 2 were hired, and 2 have a pending offer. In the Texas Fair, there was an attendance down to the Texas Fair team of individuals went there. There were 20 candidates contacted, 0 were applied, 0 were hired, and 0 pending offers. But there is one of those candidates in the 23-24 pool. And then in the South Central Fair, 30 candidates contacted, 4 were applied, 1 hired, 2 have a pending offer, and 1 in the 23-24 pool. And then when you look at the Serve and Teach job fair, those are the job fairs that were held at the beginning of the year. One was, and there's 2 that we did. One was virtual that was handled via Zoom, and one was in person at Holtzman. On the Serve side, that's all of your positions that deal with student services, service side. And then on your Teach side, those are all your positions that deal with teachers. We touched 488 candidates for the Serve Fair, 70 applied, 21 were hired. And then on the Teach Job Fair, we touched 2,210 candidates. We touched so many candidates between these two job fairs that our primary recruiter at that time, her access was turned off to her email from the district and Google because they thought she was spamming. That's how much she was contacting individuals. And so we had to redo that and re-guide it up. And that's a true story. 75 applicants applied, 22 were hired, and that's that. And so we have also, since this time, attended the HBCU job fair with a number of our colleagues in the district. And some of the data points from that particular fair is that we were able to outreach to about 666 individuals at that fair. And we have access to about 750 applicants from there. We brought back 24 high level resumes from that particular from that place. And then we also had a number of interviews on site where we were talking to some really talented individuals. We have been still in contact with them since that fair, but there were a number of individuals who had interest from all ranges of the district, which requires a little bit of different finessing and moving through that. And so I'm currently working directly with those candidates to get them prepared to be considered during our mega post, as well as doing some virtual interviews and passing on names to some different areas. So we are still actively working with that. And that was attended with some of our members from the associate superintendent's team who did an awesome job of providing that subject matter expertise to bring in those individuals who are interested in coming to MSC. So more to come from there. You may hear more from us and also from that team that really organized that and went there. So that concludes my part of operations. I know I've talked for a very long time. You said 20 minutes, but I needed to get all of that out. So that's where we got.
Yep, and this is the onboarding, just going back and forth, but we kind of made a visual of the onboarding and what that looks like and what that'll mean once it is automated, the onboarding.
Yeah, and so you have that for your usage and that.
And let me just say too, just to close it out, Mr. Rose did an awesome job, and just so you know that a lot of the things that we talked about that we want to automate, we're trying to make them into an app. For instance, Brad talked about the leaves. We're actually making an app for that, meaning we're working with tech services so that the employee can actually go into, if they have leaves and they want to apply for it, they can actually go into the app, put in their information, upload doctor's note, upload the forms, make it a fillable form, and then get it right away so that it's in there. So we are working on things like that. And that came out, we were doing that before the review came out. So the review kind of helped us say, okay, this is where we are, but this is where we need to go. So we have been working on a lot of the stuff that was in there as well. So I just want to put that in the space.
All right, thank you. Nikki, I see your hand. Board Member Pearson.
Yeah, thank you all for that update. I have actually a couple questions. Do we know the number of subs? I know that we kind of get this as part of the weekly update, but it's for like, because the numbers have changed as of like we're saying today. Do we know about the number of subs who became teachers or kind of moved into that? Because I know that that's been, when we look at the data, there's a lot of like subs leaving the district and then they're being converted into teachers though. So I don't know, or being full-time.
I did put those in my weekly update, I think 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
I don't have it from memory, but I did put it in there because I think it was asked that you wanted to know how many went from sub to permanent.
Yeah.
Then you asked the question about how many worked in multiple districts, and I think that one was 4, but I can find those numbers again and then help me with this. The other one was how many actually left the district. I think we broke it out that way, but I can find that and get that to you once again.
Yeah, an update would be good, just as we are looking at the numbers, it sometimes can make look to the public a little skewed, the way that we kind of see it. So thank you for that. And then let's see. And so I was gonna ask just about have we thought of doing an analysis about like our job fairs, because it seems as though you guys are putting a lot of work at the resource fairs, a lot of intentionality, which I'm like super pumped, and I'm glad that you all are doing that and that is happening, especially in certain spaces that we haven't necessarily been at before. But then I'm also looking at the conversion rates of how many folks are reaching 600, but then we're only converting a certain amount of folks into staff. And I don't know if you guys have thought about like maybe or just have an analysis around that piece of like why that is. I don't know if you guys have something to say about that. I'd be interested to know, or if it's something that you guys can get later. Just because I'm thinking of like, how are we efficiently using our time, but also like utilizing other stuff. I think it was super dope that the assistant soups were there too, because they are the ones who would know more information and can connect directly. And I think that that was something that we heard from other folks to say, like, you know, that one-on-one time with people who are not, you know, just only in HR, is always really good.
Absolutely. So I'll just preface this with saying, just in recruitment in general,
Yeah.
you will have a vast amount of numbers that you see from the top, and it's always going to funnel down in a way that it looks like it's not as how can I explain it? The numbers don't also necessarily convert in that way, right? And so I think I hear you from a number standpoint. What I can say, at least specifically for the fairs that we orchestrated here, or so first to start with the ones we orchestrated here. The plus side here is that people that are currently here are already here. So it's not a question of, am I moving to Wisconsin? Is that a place for me to go? Do I want to be here? They're generally like, hey, we're here, and we can stand on the name of the school district. So whatever people already know about MMSD and the successes there. So we see a larger conversion rate from that particular standpoint. For those that we travel to and we do some more of that interfacing, I'll use specifically the HBCU one, having that diverse group of individuals go, which I was the HR representative. We didn't necessarily, we weren't necessarily the head of planning that. It was coming from the associate superintendent's office, and I was there as an HR rep. But it was also very clear that you need all of those aspects there. And so having the diverse set of minds that we had there, we were able to reach a lot of very individuals and start building those relationships. A big piece of recruitment is building the relationships. And while we're still converting those numbers and seeing how that will pan out in this particular hiring season, we do have an active list of juniors that we are also in contact with. And so those juniors are like, oh, I remember them from MMSD. When I'm ready to go, I'll see that is a space. And if we can bring in individuals like in a cultural standpoint or do that type of thing, and build that word of mouth, that is where we're able to do that. So initiating that relationship there, I think was a very strategic move on behalf of the district, and moving forward to continue that relationship, I think would be a very good thing to do. Just the feedback that I've received in working with those candidates, and the feedback that we received in person at the tables, as people were like, hey, where are they? You all reached out before we got here. We talked to a lot of them before we even touched down. So they were looking for our tables and looking for us. What really pulled them in was our Black Lives Matter information, or excuse me, Black Minds Matter information, and they were really intrigued by that. So I think building those relationships and building that word of mouth in other regions is going to help us be able to recruit more, but it's really initiating that and building that.
Yeah, and that in the same vein of like recruiting more and working with like partnerships, it'd be really dope to see like how y'all can work with like UW-Madison, because I know that they've also had a very strategic and certain people in certain places to do recruitment. And so like, I know like the School of Ed, we have relationships with them. And so just trying to figure out like how we can utilize our partnerships even with UW to bring people here.
Yes.
And then kind of like do a full circle. And so that it's like, we're all kind of in the same kind of the full circle that we're working on.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. I didn't talk about Thursday's event, and Tracy, if you want to lead that.
I was just gonna say, I meet with UW School of Education quite often. We have a monthly meeting that I meet with. And that's the same thing that we have the signing day that's going to be on Thursday from 5 until 7:30 at Madison Area Technical College 2X campus. It is our signing day for all our student teachers. And so currently we have 72 that are signed up right now, and that number is still growing. And so what that is we give them an intent to hire or early hire contract. Once they fill out the application, get all the paperwork in that they need, we will find them a job. Like we're giving them a job. So we do, and that's what we do. We keep track, we keep in contact with the School of Ed. We work with Edgewood as well and some of the outlying colleges as well, depending on who our student teachers are, but also too, also on Thursday, it is also a job fair. So it's not just for teachers as well. It's a job fair overall for all the positions that we have.
And then I just have two more things, but I'll make them quick. I know that I've heard from some of the community about just resources to help folks move into certain positions. So I'm glad that you mentioned, Kurt, about for the 3 weeks that you guys have been working with special ed folks and getting their certifications. I think, something that we've been hearing in some areas is that there are certain jobs sometimes that are funneled to certain communities that they don't always get all of the opportunities or positions that are opened, like teachers or like SEAs or those kind of opportunities, but they might get more opportunities around coming to them around, like food service or custodial services and things like that. And so just making sure that we have those resources that can be filtered out to everyone. But then also the resource of helping folks move into positions. So for instance, if there is a SEA who may want to be a teacher now, how are we kind of helping them with those resources? Because I don't know, from what I'm hearing it from the community is that a lot of folks don't know that we provide those kind of services and that we can help them with their certifications and things like that. And so just getting more access out there, but information. And then it goes back to how are we promoting those kind of opportunities? But you can answer that quick if you want, or just a comment.
So I think
Sorry.
we're doing a lot there, and there are a lot of things that are part of as we move forward, a part of our handbook discussions that needs to be discussed.
Yes.
In order to be able to provide that retention around promotion and moving through and moving across areas, there are pieces that are in our handbook that we have to navigate and be able to put that in place. And so that's on my one piece that I want to put there as a pin, is that is an area of opportunity for us as a whole district to start speaking more about how to edit that handbook in a way that will make room for that retention and remove. I don't want to call them that, but yes, make room for us to be able to retain and promote in that way.
And then you're also talking about the Grow Your Own program, which is we're working with Dr. McGregory and Jen Shepke to kind of, I won't say revamp it, but build it up. Put more meat on the bones of that and just make it a more robust process. And Jen Shepke has done a lot with expanding it, like you said, and moving it forward. So we're looking at working in collaboration with Addison College, with the UW and Edgewood and what other colleges that have programs for that. So she's really taking, I think there was a webpage for it. So she's revamping that as well and updating the information to expand it and see where we can get more funding. That Ross isn't here, get more funding for that so that we can move that along and support it. So yeah, we are updating the program.
Thank you. That's it.
All right, and we have a queue going on here. Board Member Vandermeulen and then Board Member Simpkin.
Mine's really quick. I appreciate your work. Thank you for the high level report. And this question is for admin. When will the HR full report be, the confidential and privilege be removed, as it was paid for with taxpayer money? But when you read it, it says confidential and privileged, and I kind of wonder why that it's privileged.
Dr. Jenkins, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, most definitely. Just so that everyone knows, whenever we're working on something, we give it to our board. And after our board said we publish it. That night, one of the board members asked for the report. We sent it to every board member that night. Dr. McGregory did. The report, I thought it was in last week's weekly, but it will be in this week's weekly. But tomorrow is going to be posted. The confidential piece is going to be taken off. It's no longer confidential. The moment that we gave it to you all, now it's a public document. So no big deal, but thanks for bringing it up. We'll take the confidential off. We'll post it to the website again tomorrow, and you'll receive it again in your Thursday weekly update.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's all.
Board
Board Member Simpkin, followed by Board President Muldrow.
Thank you, first of all, for all of that data and information and the infographics. I am wondering about just a couple of details here. So first is in the substitute hiring information. What I saw was that it tapered off towards the winter time, and I'm wondering, does that indicate that we are full and we're no longer hiring substitutes? What was, I mean, the numbers tapered dramatically. What happened there?
So I can't speak for why we're not, why individuals aren't applying, right? But what I can gather is that at the beginning of the school year, you get a huge amount of people who are like, hey, I'm applying that I'm interested in being a substitute teacher this year. So you will see large numbers. As the year moves forward, those individuals that are interested in working with the district have generally already put their information out there. The applicants that we're receiving more so in the middle of the school year are generally individuals who are like, oh, let me see, this is something I might want to do now. Here's a piece. And so it's not as, those that work in a traditional school setting and that have a teaching background, they are not moving around in the middle of the year. They're generally looking for those pieces starting now in the spring to start to be on that school year cycle. And so if we have people that were interested in being a substitute, they've either probably found something permanent, especially considering that we have the teacher shortage, or they're already actively working as a substitute with us. And so that shows that taper, that is why the tapered amount is there. We will see it increase again over the summer months, and it will likely decrease again later in the fall.
Okay, that really made sense. So what is our goal number for subs, for active subs?
That's a good question.
I don't know if we really have a goal so much as we look at the hiring. So for instance, right now we're at 67, we're short 67 teachers. Of those 67 teachers, 50 are would need a sub. So we want to make sure that our pool is indicative of our hiring. And so when I came here, just kind of getting an idea of how many subs that we hired in a year. I mean, sometimes you'd have as many as 500-600. Sometimes 800, it depend on. We haven't set a goal. Our thing is to look at what types of subs we have, so permit versus certified, and then also as Board Member Pearson said, know your own. Those that we're looking for. So that's why we focus on, especially at like our student teachers. So we do this intent to hire. And if we have positions in place, we look at Megaport as well to say, where will our shortage be? What will we need? And then we kind of do an analysis of subs that we will need for what positions that we have. So it's not a set number so much as we kind of, I love data. So we look at the statistical analysis of where we will need. So for instance, CC teachers, we will always need those. Elementary and middle school will always need. And then of course the STEM. So we look at those as well. So it's not a set number, but it's a percentage.
So it does. So something that maybe I should know, but I don't. So at the beginning of each year or each summer, do we have to start fresh with all of our subs, or you're talking about hiring 500 or 600 in a year? Do we already have a big pool from previous years? So around how many subs do we have now?
I think we said that 697. So the number of subs we have currently. And then as the year goes on, we'll hire. So we're always hiring. We never stop. We do in the summer, I hate to use the word like a scrub, just to say, okay, as Mr. Rose said, you have to work 2 times in a school year, and once a semester. So we always look at those who have not met that threshold. And then that's where you see there, we will call, we send out surveys and say, hey, are you still interested? You still want to be a sub for us? Some will say no, some will say yes. Some will say, I'll get back with you in that way. And then that's how we look at that. We look at how many we're losing from that, and then we continue to hire. So it's ongoing, we never stop.
Okay, so looking at the numbers that we have now, how many of our empty positions a given day are filled with central staff, central office staff versus subs? Have we the number of times that central office staff are filling in, or is that stayed steady throughout this school year?
Well, central office support was very prevalent in the fall semester. And so at the beginning of the fall semester, in collaboration with the superintendent's office, HR and the superintendent's office worked together to build a list of individuals from central office staff that would support in the school building. As we moved into spring, that was supposed to be readjusted and looked at, and I would have to lean on my colleagues from the superintendent's office to see if we have, from my knowledge, we haven't been re-implementing our central office support this particular semester, because there has been some communication about how does that work with everything that they were balancing. And so ultimately what your question was is if it didn't reduces the amount of the vacancies, and really that central office support is there for multiple things and to kind of be ad hoc. And so once they hit the buildings, they are, if they have the particular license to teach for what they need to meet in that particular area, we have that. We also have individuals from central office support who are going out from the student services side and filling in those vacancies from that particular avenue. And so I can say confidently that yes, the support was there to fill in those vacancies, but we still had those vacancies and we were recruiting for them. So I don't know if I'm answering your question fully how you were looking for, but it's more of a complex answer because some people have dual licenses, we're able to pop in and pop out. And we also have to account for what is not being talked about fully is that we don't just have vacancies in the buildings based on, or we just don't just have the need for subs in the buildings based on vacancies. We also have individuals who are on medical leave, and then we also have individuals who are using PI time on a daily basis. So you also have to account for your regular call-ins. And in some buildings, the call-in amount is much higher than other buildings. And so you see a need for subs in some buildings and not in others. And so all of that plays into where the central office subs go and where subs are deploying to from frontline.
Okay, so I see that Dr. Jenkins just popped on probably to the other half of that answer.
Yeah, and really, between our associate students, Dr. Hicks and also Ms. Green, it could tell you, but what we've been very intentional about is trying to reduce the number of central office individuals who are subbing, and I'll have Ms. Green and Dr. Hicks speak to that because they also work closely with HR to try to do that. And that's been one of our goals this year. How can we have our support staff actually back in the building, the coaches, the PD people and all of that? So Ms. Green, if you want to start with that and Dr. Hicks could close it out for you.
Absolutely. Board Member Simpkin, could you just repeat your question so I make sure I answer it appropriately?
Yes. So I'm wondering about the trend over the school year for the use of central office staff as substitutes in schools.
Absolutely. I'll share what I've shared before. I think Mr. Rose said this a little, but first semester, our central office staff, both teaching staff and non-teaching staff, signed up for at least 2 days a week to sub. Now, the 2 days a week from central office was the decision from our staff, meaning like what days make the most sense based on everything else in their schedule and which kind of side of town might be best situated for them. From there, we work directly with the sub office to place those individuals every day based on highest need. That happened throughout the entire first semester. For the second semester, we scaled back the support from central office for a few reasons. One, we also have our own vacancies here at central office, and so the need to scale back somewhat in order to be able to continue work streams was really important. And also we needed to have some of our staff fill in permanently. So I think I've mentioned this before. We have staff that are certified in areas where we did not have substitutes or any hires, mostly in the dual language or world language area. So we have a few individuals that are still subbing full-time at a middle school, at a high school, across the board. Now, other staff members are going in usually 1 day a week and or every other week, dependent on their schedule, and to the schools with the highest need. Now, that highest need is usually based on kind of staff to absence ratio. It isn't necessarily always based on the largest number of vacancies at a particular school. So we've been rotating staff that way for this second semester. So hopefully that answers your question, but let me pause to see if I need to clarify anything, Board Member Simpkin.
I think my follow-up, and Dr. Hicks can talk about this as well, is what is the impact of pulling back the central office staff on the classrooms and the teachers that are.
So I would say that, excuse me, thank you for that question, Board Member Simpkin. But I would say that the impact is still real in terms of how it impacts school. I believe, though, that in trying to balance priorities within the district and getting that work done, along with trying to serve scholars in schools, is a mismatch at some times. But again, coming with the priority of ensuring that the schools who have the high absentee rates are getting support where needed. So it continues to impact just from the fact that we don't have staff, but I would say that our principals have created systems in order to make sure that all of their spaces are covered and supported for scholars.
Thank you so much. I feel like it's really important for us to know where we're at as far as that staffing situation. So I appreciate you sharing that as well. I'm going to move back to the HR slides, and I'm wondering, when we're looking at the hiring process and what steps you've been putting into place that are more automated, what is your estimate right now for how long it will take somebody to go through from beginning to end the hiring process?
Well, it depends on which piece you're talking about. We're looking at automation on a number of the areas. If you're looking at it specifically in the hiring process piece, that I don't have an estimate of the time it will take currently, because we're still exploring that and how it looks with the Cornerstone, which is our applicant tracking system that we're using. So we're still in conversation about how to streamline that and what that will do. For the onboarding side of it, which I think may be part of what you're asking about, it is still going to be driven solely by the employee who is being hired. And so right now we get of information that comes back that says that onboarding takes too long, it's too long of a process, it's too cumbersome, it's too difficult, right? Part of that is some of the appointments that need to take place to get your fingerprinting and your background checking. And then some of it is driven by the employee. They have to actually go and do the things and actually go in and do the pieces. What we don't have right now that will assist in shortening that time frame is the automated reminders that come in at each step. So what we can do without having to manually do that is program the system to send those reminders, have that information, spit out those reports of this person is stuck here. It also removes the need for paper to be passed from each of our areas. So currently paper is passed from the front desk to the specialists are there entering information, it's passed to payroll, it's passed here. With the onboarding automation, that wouldn't necessarily happen. It would cut the time of the processing because it would be, you can see where things are in real time. You would have more people that would have access to be able to see that. And you wouldn't have to, right now we're using a spreadsheet across the district for people to see where people are. That wouldn't be the case. You'd have that information. So I can't necessarily say what the estimation of how that would shorten it. What I can say though, is that it will shorten, but until we run it with a group of individuals to test it, we have the ability to forecast how much shorter that would go.
Let me just add on to that too, is that he's absolutely correct, but there's also a piece in there about the references. So when people say it's taking too long, a lot of times when we go back to make sure it's the references, either we haven't gotten them back yet from their reference check. Then the other piece, as Mr. Rose said too, has to deal with them getting the TB testing, fingerprinting, making sure they're doing the background check for the parents. So those are some of the snacks. So we are looking at how do we fix those, because we do know kind of where the where it stops or it gets bottlenecked. So so we do know that those are the key areas where the bottlenecks are. And so we are working through fix as well.
Since you're talking about the new system's gonna kind of shoot out reminders, are they sending them to the applicants or?
Yes. And then the hiring manager would have the ability to see where someone is. So right now, a lot of our hiring managers are saying, I don't know where this person is. They're saying they've done it, but you all are saying they haven't, and it frustrates our hiring managers. With the system, they'd be able to see what we see, not necessarily the details, but they'd see where they are in the process. So even if we're reaching out and they're not answering us, they'll reach out, if the hiring manager can see that, the hiring manager will be trained to be able to say, hey, so-and-so, I really want you to start, but you got to finish this stuff, right? And that's usually an easy way that we're able. Those hiring managers that do that in conjunction with us, they have a better success rate of their applicants coming through quicker.
All right, Board President Muldrow, followed by Board Member Nichols.
So I want to say that looking at the data you all presented us with this evening, that it's hard for me not to perceive that as incomplete data. And I'll go back to the administration before you all. So one of the talking points the administration used often was a talking point around how many staff of color had been hired by the district. And the data that was missing was how many of those staff actually exited within their first year, right? Because the number of hires never aligned with how many staff of color were actually working here. So when we talk about how many people we've hired, how have we retained those people? How many of those people have made it through their first year? And the other set of that data would be how many people have exited so that we've needed to hire people. Because I will say, one of the best strategies for addressing vacancies is not creating them in the first place. And so the retention effort around new hires is one thing, but the retention strategy around folks who've been here long term is something I'm missing from this presentation. Are you all prepared to speak to kind of what that looks like?
So we did have a slide in here that shows the diversity rate of hire for our staff of color. But to talk about the retention strategies, we had wanted to do, and we were talking with Tech Services in the interview, and looking at doing that, because you are absolutely correct, between 0 to 5 years, that's the critical point of when you look at any employee from any company, because between that time is they leave. Normally at the 3-year mark, they normally decide on if they're gonna stay or go. But 5 years and then 5 to 10 is when they're vested. So we are looking at that as well. I think with Cornerstone, not to say that it's a miracle worker, but they do have things in there that we can talk about that looks at that keeps track of that as well. And when you talk about retention strategies, y'all can jump in if you want to, but we're looking at what that means and what that looks like. So we're looking at technology, we're looking at innovation in teaching and learning, keeping our staff up to date on new and innovative ways to teach our scholars, professional training. We're looking at the equity and inclusion of our district and what that really means. What kind of training are we doing? We're looking at the programming within the buildings to build that relationship. To be honest with you, like I said, I like data. So we have looked at the exit interviews, and I am working with legal services to kind of put together a report on that as well. But a lot of that has to deal with mentoring. We have a great mentoring and support pipeline. But some of the top things that we look at that we find is that building relationships, and then supervisors. And then what that looks like, because a lot of times we hear is that when we talk to the student teachers, and you're absolutely correct, when we go to these recruitment fairs, they want to talk to the people that are in the buildings. They want to talk to teachers, they want to talk to building principals, they want to talk to those folks because they want to build that relationship. They want to feel wanted. So we look at that. That's a big piece of the retention strategies. And nationally, when you look at that, when you look at exit interviews and statistical analysis of why people are leaving or why people are leaving the teaching profession, it's one, building relationships, and the two is supervisory relationships as well, because that's huge. And then mentoring, that camaraderie, that feeling that they belong. So we're looking at those as well. And so we have been looking at those for quite some time. We don't have any statistical analysis as of yet, but we've been working on it. But I will say that I have been looking at the exit interviews as well. But on the front end, you want to look at what that looks like when we say, okay, you're done with onboarding with HR. Okay, now we're going to get you to your building. And we want to make sure that the buildings have that relationship. And that's why we're getting them involved in the onboarding process, so that it's kind of like, I hate to say, it's like we hand them off to say, okay, go and prosper and do well. And so we want to make sure that they have the tools that they need when they get there. So that is part of the strategies that we have.
Yeah. And not to cut you off there at all, Ms. Caradon, I think that's a great question. I think that's one that we have to really address, because I know when I came in, a part of looking at our district was about how many staff of color. And I'm talking about specifically in teaching positions. Yes, administratively, but we had a very low ratio of teachers of color. And then we even had a very lower ratio of retaining teachers of color. So I've been very much paying attention to this. And I think when Mr. Rose spoke about going to the recruitment fairs, there's always a debate. Should we recruit everyone from here locally? Is that most cost effective, or should we be going out? The reality of it is you can look at every school in the state of Wisconsin and you cannot find 24 almost combined that you can find at one historical Black college. So it's important that Legacy Bowl had a number of potential staff across the country. Mr. Rose mentioned talking to juniors, but we also went out and talked to freshmen about the future of looking at coming to Wisconsin. We've also joined with various individuals from the city. And I'm also proud to say that the city also had some recruiters down there with us. It's a long-term strategy. It's a multi-year strategy to be able to get individuals. But once we get them here, the retention is hard. Even ones that we brought in recently, even ones who've been here 15, 16 years, they're talking about how difficult it is to be a person of color in a district like ours that sometimes the peers don't even respect their voices. So we have some culture changes to do. We'd say, yes, we want to be about Black Minds Matters, but Black minds are also adults. And how the adults are treated means a lot in terms of the retention. I think the Grow Your Own that we talked about earlier, with looking at the village builders, and I think that's going to be a long-term strategy. We're trying to do short and long-term strategies, but the village builders is about the best opportunity to take people from this community, went through this district, and try to pair them up to do the project, going to Madison College and then following up at UW-Madison or whichever other college that can certify teachers. It's a struggle nationally trying to get teachers, and teachers are not always not coming into the profession because of pay. They also want to be valued, and that's what we're finding. So statistically, I think our potential for recruiting is a lot greater than what the reality has been, and all the statistics around. And I bring this up because the research clearly talks about students having one teacher of color, their propensity to graduate from high school, having two, that they would go further on into college. So even though it's very costly, the other costs that we don't talk about, the psychological effect, that whole piece there, that students, when they don't see someone look like them, what does that mean to them as they're trying to persist through life? So Chair Muldrow, that is a multi-billion-dollar question you asked. And I think that we need to think about that up front. Again, I keep saying these equity strategies, things that we're talking about, we need to put them up front and not at the end of the budget. So thank you for that question. And we'll get back with clear data on what that looked like during coming out of a pandemic too, which we know historically there's a shortage, not necessarily, I'm going to stop saying it's a shortage in teachers, people leaving the profession because it's not set up for them to be really successful. And that's not just staff of color too.
So I want to say that I think there was a bit of the essence of my question that is missing, which is there is the part of my question that is about kind of the data that informs our recruitment. So who is leaving and exiting the district, and what are we doing to retain people and address that so that we're not creating more vacancies or kind of a revolving door within our schools. Tracy, I want to appreciate the three factors that you pointed out, and I want to elevate the relationship people have to their direct supervisor. So I do think one of the things we may want to be mindful of is stability amongst our principals and what it looks like at our schools that have had stable, high quality leadership from principals in terms of their ability to retain and solidify their staff and stabilize their school over the course of years versus the difficulty that there is for our newer principals and maybe some of the additional support our newer principals need to build their team, to retain the team that's already there, and to do this work. The other question I wanted to ask, I very much appreciate the presentation, but there was a part of me that felt like this presentation seemed disconnected from the feedback that we got recently from the HR audit. The single greatest complaint from interviewed individuals is the lack of responsiveness by the HR department. Internal customers assume HR feels no sense of urgency to respond to questions or requests for support. That comes directly from the report we just got. So I guess I want to understand how you all are leveraging the feedback we recently received to enhance our communication, to be more responsive, to make sure that when people are asking for help from HR or when people are trying to follow up around a possible position, that we are engaging with people, within a timely fashion, within a reasonable fashion, both in terms of the expectation of you all and this work, also what people expect in terms of communication.
Yeah, so.
Go ahead.
Dr. Jenkins, go ahead.
No, that's directly from the report. I appreciate you lifting that, Chair Muldrow, and that's a point that I've been having with Ms. Carradine as we've been talking about. That's a real low-hanging fruit. We have to treat people how we want to be treated, and we have to respond to people in a timely fashion. And we've heard time and time their experience we've heard the things that we hear, we don't hear everything. We hear sometimes they're not getting responded to in a timely fashion, or the customer service wasn't there. That's something we're talking about. Mr. Rhodes, when he spoke, he talked about some of the changes that they're making down there. We know we have to look at it organizationally, and we know we've been understaffed. But right now, as Ms. Carradine and I had a conversation today about what's the response. We had a conversation before, how we're going to respond to certain things in this report. And that's why we wanted to have the high level meeting with the reviewer coming and sharing publicly what was going on. And then we were working on it in between now. They're trying to organize down in HR on some of those things like that. And let me just lift this too. You heard from Jennifer tonight, our payroll person, and you hear some things, but not many. Spot on. Mostly every time I hear things, it's real positive about what's going on in payroll or other areas too that I didn't lift, or the report didn't lift. But we do know that there are some challenges, and they're putting together a plan now. We're going to come back. We wanted to have this meeting tonight and then come back with a clear plan. What's going to be the short-term response? What's going to be this next month? What's going to be the next 2 months? And so forth. The reviewers told us 18 months, probably what it would take to have this turnaround in terms of the things that she outlined. But in particular, just like what you said, that was one of the low-hanging fruits. How can we get a faster turnaround in some of the things that we're doing? And I think as we staff like we need to. That's one thing, but the customer service piece, I say that to everybody in our organization. I'm saying that, and it starts with all of us, is getting it right the first time. And so many people have shared with me, and I know that they've shared it with you all and with HR, that first experience wasn't good. So we're working on that right now. That's what I would tell you about that. And I know there was some other things you wanted to lift in that report directly, Ms. Carradine. If you want to bring those out, you can share that here too as well. Or you can continue with your questions, Chair Mulder. Sorry.
So in terms of communication, my understanding right now is that that's something you all are working out a plan to address and are planning to bring back to the board. Does that seem accurate?
That's correct. We're addressing those things that were in the report that came back, and some of those things are short, low-hanging fruit, and some of those things are more cumbersome. Some of those things in the report already have been worked on, and they shared some of that tonight. But when we come back, it'll be a comprehensive response to the plan. That plan gave us, really confirmed some things we already knew in cases, and then also is setting the fire as to what's the next steps, because there must be a next step and there must be a response to that report.
My last question is specific to kind of our long-term planning. So looking at how many of our staff are currently eligible for retirement, how many of our staff next year will be eligible for retirement, and what are we doing in anticipation of the fact that teaching, similar to nursing, is associated with an aging population of people. There is a large number of folks who got into this work a long time ago and have given their career to education. They have every right to retire, but that is going to mean something specific for our district. In terms of having an analysis of how many people could be exiting in any given year based in retirement, what does that look like for us, and what should we anticipate?
I'm going to turn this over to HR, but I'm going to say the first part. One of the recommendations coming to the board is that we're going to do early hire and overstaff, particularly at the elementary. For this if we could overstaff, that would be a beautiful thing. But we're going at it to try to overstaff, to have individuals in mostly our district elementary, just like any other district, those CC positions, those language positions, we're going out to try to really go after that. But I'll have HR speak to that, but the whole early hire has not been able to early hire serves as a barrier for us in terms of what our policy, and we'll come back with that recommendation and tell you exactly what we mean by that so that we can start hiring. People are hiring right now, the teachers, the principals, key positions. And if we follow our process like we typically do, they're going through the community pool first, then they're coming back and it's a fit. So I'm going to bring forth a recommendation to look at a policy recommendation to change to best position us to be able to accelerate our hiring for teachers and for our administrators and even other staff right now, early hires. But HR, you want to respond to that?
Just to add on to what Dr. Jenkins said, Jennifer did run those numbers for me at one point in time because we wanted to get an idea of what the trends are looking like. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but she did run them unless you.
Well, the average retirement age of our teachers is 56, and the average age of all of our staff is 58. They retire. So we are aware of that number. We can certainly get you all of the numbers of people to retire because they are eligible to retire at 55.
So we have a significant number of folks who are eligible to retire and are staying on. And I guess what I would really like from that is a percentage. So if 25% of our staff are eligible for retirement, I think that we need to behave accordingly. If that's 12, but in the next 5 years, we know that 12% is going to become 38%. We need to behave accordingly. And I think that is part of our long-term strategy, is to be able to say, we can, the writing is on the wall and we have to address it. Thank you all for addressing my questions.
Board Member Nichols.
Right. First of all, thank you for the update. It's good to actually hear a lot of the progress and some of the systems that you've been developing that we don't always get to hear about. So I really appreciate the update. There's a couple of things that I wanted to just follow up with from the report we got from Whipfleet. Some of which I heard you address tonight, but there are a couple of things I wanted to just better understand. The first thing I want to ask about, and let me just like state this, that in the Whipfleet report and presentation, we heard quite a bit about technology. And I know you talked a little bit about technology tonight. I heard about Munis as the HRIS and Cornerstone, having some of the applicant tracking system and some other functionality that perhaps hasn't been fully utilized yet. I heard, Kurt, you talk about those two systems needing to talk to each other. And I think what that raises for me is a legit question, which is, will they and can they talk to each other? And if they cannot, what is our plan kind of moving forward? Because as I heard Dr. Jenkins just talk about even like early hires, right? You want systems that are able to take the applications in, they're not lost somewhere, you know, you can move them through the system. And so I am just curious about what have you learned as you've been talking with tech people? Can these two systems talk to each other? And then like, where are we in the process of like that integration?
Yes and yes. So yes, they can talk to each other, and yes, they will. Where we are in the process is I talked a little bit about onboarding, and we had started working on that in Cornerstone. And then we also talked about the upgrade in Munis. The upgrade in Munis is necessary for us to be able to build the not for us to build it, but for our vendors to build the information for them to be able to speak with each other. The reason that we have that disconnect right now is because the system, where we are with Munis, the version of it is outdated. In order to bring it to a current space where they can talk to another system, it needs to be updated. Once that takes place, then our vendors can create something in the middle. Jennifer's been actually working on this too very heavily. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Tyler Technologies was actually scheduled for a business review so that they would come in. I know that they met with budget planning and accounting and like went through all of their processes and said, hey, you're underutilizing this section of the software. And we do plan on having them come in and look at our HR software in the same way so that we can leverage all of the pieces that are already existing in the software and make them work better for us. They have a new, they have a substitute module that we are not using.
Munis?
Yes.
Okay.
And we would like to have them.
It has to be open.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. We would like to have them come and demonstrate that to us. We're definitely looking at all of those things. Munis has their own applicant tracking system. There may be pieces of that we can leverage versus Cornerstone, but we're underutilizing Munis and we need to use it more.
Okay. And so thank you for that. In that process, as you all are learning more about what the upgrade would give you in functionality, is that like a longer term plan? Or will that impact like this spring, summer hiring?
It's gonna be longer term.
So it's a longer term. Okay. So for early hires this spring, for principal hiring and placement, for all the things that happen kind of in this next season, this upcoming season, do we feel that our technology systems are ready to go? I mean, I know that there have been some integration and streamlining last year, just wanting to make sure that our applications are not kind of lost in the system or any of that. Like, do you feel like we're in a good place with our technology platforms, or are we still working on some, I don't know, some efficiencies in those systems to be ready to fully go?
We're in a good place. We're actually, and they can speak to that, talking with Cornerstone on a consistent basis, and with Munis, we're talking with them all the time. We're also in, what do you call them, work groups? I forget the fancy term that we use. User groups. There you go, user groups.
Okay.
That we talk so that they can help us build what we're looking for. So we're working with them consistently, both Munis and Cornerstone, to make sure that they can talk to each other.
We also have, so our HRIS manager focuses very heavily on understanding and knowing the systems and working in streamlining things and building that piece. Hired a very skilled HRIS manager, which was actually a great opportunity to retain some talent that we had in our HR office. She was promoted over to the HRIS manager. And she, along with the rest of our work group, have been working very closely to examine those systems and see where they are. So where we are right now, we're in a good space where we can maintain and go through the season. We'll be in a much better space as we continue to work through that process and do those things. He is also comes to the table with the hands-on experience of being an analyst who worked directly in the recruitment process. So we already came to the table with ideas of how we can better streamline from that hands-on knowledge and understanding there. And so that is a gem or a great piece that we have that is actually moving this along a lot faster than we possibly would have been able to do with someone that may have been external or didn't know some of those barriers that were already in place.
Okay, well, that's really good to hear.
We're gaining, like, we're making little, small gains, but we're making them right now, and rather than having to wait until we have to make a giant gain. So every process, we're looking at it and making sure that it's in place, and with fresh eyes from the HRIS manager, we've already identified some things that weren't really working the way that they should have been for analysts. So that's creating efficiencies. We're looking at data fidelity. So doing all of that as we look forward to in 8 months or 10 months, rolling out some bigger changes.
And then we're also taking that too and looking at what kind of data sets are we looking for. And so with that in mind, it's like, okay, if we're going to look for this data set, what does that mean when we're building these systems as well? So we're creating dashboards as well, both within Cornerstone, Munis as well, so that we can pull that data as needed and necessary.
Okay.
And have it at our fingertips as well.
Great. Related to the use of technology, I actually work for a company that's based out of California. And so when I was onboarded, I had to upload all of my documents electronically because I couldn't go into Oakland, California to turn in my paperwork. And when I was requested to do fingerprinting, like that was all set up. So I'm curious if there is a way for us to use a similar type of a GoCo or a Zenefits or, like some of these other platforms that are based for national companies that hire employees all over the country. Or if we think that the technology that we have will give us a similar functionality. And I'm just responding to some of where you said some of that backlog or that bottleneck happens in the hire to onboarding process.
Yes, so what we're working on right now with the technology that we have will provide a similar experience to what you receive, right? And we're already paying for it, right? So
Is that in
it's in Cornerstone.
It's in Cornerstone. Okay, great.
So that would digitize those documents that would not require you to come down here and drop them off. And that streamlines that. We are already utilizing the fingerprinting in those aspects from a technological standpoint that have already streamlined it. So those pieces are fine. So it's ultimately, that would definitely give you the same type of experience and digitize it in that way. So yes.
Okay.
And as we are looking at renewing contracts, we are also looking at other options.
Okay. And are you imagining that some of that will happen in this upcoming kind of bigger hiring cycle, or is that also kind of later? It's still in development.
We're working on it.
We're working on it now. Yes, and we're anticipating that the onboarding piece will be released in May, which will be helpful for the remainder of the peak of our mega posting and when employees are coming in. So that should assist in curbing some of those pieces that you heard in the HR review about the onboarding process.
Right, great. Okay, thank you so much for the technology piece. I do want to come back to one aspect of the retention piece that board member Muldrow brought up, because I feel like as a board, we have actually been very interested in the idea and the importance of retention. And yet, to your comment, Kurt, there is an interdependence, right? Like you all can get folks through the system, but once they're placed, you actually are really relying on school principals and a school community that's going to help retain that employee. We sometimes forget that because you all are producing the numbers and the reports, and then it kind of comes back to you, like, what are you doing to retain folks? But oftentimes retention is out at the school. So my curiosity is, as we're thinking about new hires, are there ways that maybe if there could be a more proactive way to maybe actually check in, like HR checking in with new hires periodically throughout their first year? Or, I don't know, looking at schools that have higher turnover rates and wonder, maybe providing those principals with additional supports. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, you all are the HR experts, not me, but I guess I'm just thinking about, are there more proactive ways to potentially support retention when we know that it's primarily out at the schools, and the experience that employees are having in schools? Just not sure if you all have thought about how to strengthen the retention piece in those kind of ways. Oh, Dr. Jenkins?
Yeah, I'm just gonna tell you, I've been talking to staff, and just like at Mendota, seems very small, right? They had the Motown thing and all the staff got involved. And when I went out, it was so many smiles. I haven't seen that many smiles from staff since before the pandemic. We're just getting back into a space and learning how to even socialize as adults together. And so Mr. Jones with MTI, he and I talked about being intentional about getting staff and administration and everybody. We need to build a family together. And I hate to go way back to when I was here like 300 years ago in 93, but doing things together made a difference. It's what made Memorial come up with the collaborative problem solving, because the way people approach things. And I think the earlier question about the relationship with the supervisor and the staff, building reps and principals have to work together. We have to work together with our families. When everybody know that we're together, relationships really does too matter. And I think right now, being intentional about setting those things up like that, and then it makes the handbook process easier when you know people. And when you know people in your community and you feel like you're part of a community. So those are the things just in the short run. That's not an exhaustive list, but the small things really do matter when it comes to retention. People feel like you can see them, you hear them, then you can feel them. And we've been very disconnected. I just said it from the superintendent. I'm talking about my level, me. Disconnected. The whole virtual thing just does not work well for human beings. So we will always need one another and be able to depend on one another. That helps retention, really does. But it's a national thing that we all are talking about.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dr. Jenkins. And yes, I do think it's the relationships and folks feeling like they are respected, they are heard, they are seen. And if they have issues, they know where they can go, right? To get some of those issues addressed and not feel like it's been kind of swept under the carpet. And so I know there is an employee relations aspect of HR, and just wondering if there's, I don't know, maybe in the future, like what would we need to do to bolster the employee relations part of human resources?
I know, and I know we've talked about that before too, and I think what's really important is building relationships and also building trust. And you build trust by creating fair and equitable processes. You build trust by everybody gets the same information, creating a handbook that is really benefits the employees, that helps the employees who care for our scholars be successful. Working collaboratively with MTI, I think those are all pieces to build that trust. It's gonna take time.
And then just to add on to that too, is we're looking at doing, updating our website to kind of put together a list of who to contact for what.
Okay, yeah, I saw that.
How to, where to, who to go to. So we're looking at building that up and bolstering that as well.
And in addition to that, we're looking at our customer service standpoint of making sure things are aligned where they should be. Because there has been historically a lot of people leaving in and out of the HR office, people have started taking care of things that really are outside of their particular area. Like people are stepping over and helping do this, and people then think that that's this person's job. They should do this, and that. And it's now we've been trying to pull those things apart and put those into spaces so that we have a better service option out. It's not, oh, go to this person for this, go to this person for that. Here's where you go for any questions related around this, and having more of a broader approach so that people do feel more comfortable reaching out and contacting.
So we have to invest. I'm sorry, we just have to invest in our staff and make our actions align with our investments too. And our staff don't expect everything in the world. They just want to know that we really are working on their behalf to treat them fairly. And I mean, that's just, and the conversations go better when we know we have a better relationship, when we don't have those trust, like everything they just said in that, because nobody goes into education trying to get wealthy. That's not the aim. The goal is to make an impact. So that's what I would say about that. Those relationships, everything you all are saying, it matters. And I thank you for lifting that HR. And we know we have short-term and long-term work to do.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jenkins. My last little segue, my last point was just gonna be back around the one point that was in the Whipley report around, kind of creating and being able to sustain that culture of customer service. And in some of your comments tonight, I heard what it sounded like was that if we can use our technology to automate some of the reminders or automate some of the kind of standard communication responses, that will at least improve the response rate for new hires or applicants and employees. So I want to make sure I heard this right. Are you thinking right now that it would be the use of technology to help make that customer service response rate improved, or is it a combination of, maybe I misheard a little bit?
It's multifold.
Okay, yeah.
So you have the technology that assists with more routine things and providing response or providing updates in ways that you don't have to manually do. That frees us up to be able to be more responsive to other things and be more in depth into those things. So if I can remove this manual follow-up that I'm doing for each individual person and move this over here, then I can take these questions in more depth and have more one-on-one time with individuals because I'm not so worried about getting these manual pieces out. I think the other side of it too is also defining what the district sees as good customer service, right? Because if it's an answer 5 minutes after I email you, then we may not ever meet what the district is looking for customer service. But if it's an accurate answer that doesn't require me to have to go back and forth with you with multiple things, like if I can have the time to research the answer, a lot of times there are multiple layers to questions that we receive. And we have to research and say, because if you if you join the institution at this time, you might have something different, or if you are a retiree, or if you're in this particular, you know, so it takes someone to go in and do a laser focus and get a craft a response that makes sense and that is thoughtful and that has all the pieces. And a lot of times people are wanting something because I sent you the message right now. I want it right now. And so it's a piece of what we're training the staff to do is to say, hey, I received your message and I'm working on that. I need to look a little bit deeper into that. And so it's that piece as well. So no, automation will never replace customer service. People have to be a part of that. And so they can be a tool to move away some of the more routine questions or routine things that happen, but technology can never replace people.
Yeah. And this is not a request. Okay, so I just want to be clear, but I think a lot of times when we get updates from HR, we get updates on kind of your outcome data, right? How many people did you hire? How many people were filled? What's the, right? Which is important. I also think at some point, it would be great for this board to have an understanding of like how many calls or emails does an analyst handle in order to really support a school? How many retirees are coming, you know what I mean? Because I think that one of the things that still doesn't feel clear to me in terms of the demand of an internal HR department in a system as big as ours is what is the adequate staffing? What is the adequate resource that HR needs to actually do the job well? And so I know you've got some vacancies, but the vacancies you do have don't still yet tell me if our HR is really functioning, you know what I mean, with everything that you would need to create an experience for applicants all the way to hires. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not saying that we have money or resources to throw into HR right now. It's just that I don't know that we have that conversation either. Like we talk about the one recruiter that's been vacant, but I don't know if one recruiter is adequate, right? I mean, I can guess that it isn't, but yeah. So at some point I think it would be great to also have a conversation about like what an ultimately well-resourced HR department would look like and what we could gain from that as a school system.
So I'm glad that you asked that question because I will say that when I first got here, we've gone through some receptionists, but as we were using people, I was having them tally the calls. Just coming in and coming through the front door, just tick mark it to try to figure out, but we've had some transitions. So that's kind of been lost because we were like in hire mode, you know, just getting them in, but we were starting to take tally because a lot of it had to do with because we do the front door. We do door 8 and people coming through. I wanted them to tally how many were really for HR, how many were really not for HR, meaning how many were coming in. Are we letting them in the buildings? What are we doing? So I wanted to keep track of that. We were also starting to keep track of phone calls, where they go, where they come from, and how many we were getting, but they kind of fallen off a little bit because we're focused on other stuff. But I do want to bring that back because you're absolutely correct on what that looks like and what that is. Yeah.
And also that's part of the reason with the ER data we put in there. This is data that we built from May of 2022 to present. So there's caseload breakdown. From that time period, we've had 1,074 cases. There is one permanent ER position in the Madison Metropolitan School District, and that's my position. I have an ESSER funded position that is going to be, the monies will run out in July of 2024, right? That person just is going to be moving to a different position. So, and I also have one LTE who's going to be leaving in June. So that's part of the reason I put those metrics in there. I wanted to show you the demand of the types of cases. I talked about the type of cases that we're getting with the discipline and performance management, coaching, administrative leave grievances, letters of expectations, workplace bullying reports. Those are coming into our office. So the demand is really, really high and we just don't have the staff, we're keeping up and we are partnering very well with legal. And we partner with the associate superintendents very well, but there's a high demand.
Okay, and the ER, the employee relations that you just mentioned are like some of the issues that are happening. Okay,
Which is a part of HR, it's a piece of HR.
okay, and I think just so I'm clear, I think when I talk about employee relations, I'm also thinking more of the proactive side as well, and maybe that's called something else in an HR term.
No, and I think that that's a really good point, and we do have to have a proactive piece, the state surveys, strategic planning. With the amount of caseloads right now and not having the staff, we're just not at that point right now where we can do that planning.
And what you say, and that goes along with what you're saying too, is what a fully staffed HR department would look like. And where we need that. So we are, and even before this review, when we were looking at those points, those data points to say, okay, where can we look at? And then with Kurt coming in, and then Jennifer has been very helpful with using Munis too, kind of get an understanding for that. And then as Brad came in, looking at what we need for benefits, you know, like like I said, we're building the app to make it easier for our staff and for our employees to say, okay, here's a question I have. We did the same thing for COVID leave. We created that app so that they could upload with the tech services. So when they were looking to apply for COVID leave, and help me, Brad, if I'm misspeaking, but to help with COVID leave, they would go in, you know, type everything in and then upload either their tests or their results. So we were using that too as part of the technology to help serve customers. So yeah, so we were looking at that, and that wasn't quite reflected in the review, but that's what we were doing.
We definitely want to be in a place where we're proactive. It's
Yes, absolutely. We do.
And I think
Yes, I'm sure of that. Thank you.
I was gonna say, we want to support you in getting there too. So I just want to recognize through this discussion tonight, the heavy lift of upgrading and automating systems at the same time that you're working in the system you have to hire staff and to respond to employee issues and questions. So just recognizing the sheer amount of work this is, and that you also have been understaffed as you've gone along the way. That being said, I do want to recognize again the report that came to us and those 30-day actions that were recommended. And just by the timeline, realizing that the consultant is prioritizing, because taking that shorter term action could make a big difference in the morale and the communication and all of that. So I guess I didn't expect the 30-day to start as soon as we received it at the end of February, but I am interested in how you were going to respond to those, you know, the 30-day, the 3-month, and this is probably a question for Dr. Jenkins, but how we'll see that happening. And if, I mean, maybe you don't agree with them all, right? How there is going to be some response to that. Yeah, I'll just leave that there. No response needed, but like the analysis that asked for earlier, I think it'll really help if there's some way to sort of tease that out, what the essential actions are going to be along the way. So, and then the last thing, just circling back to what Board President Muldrow said, I think it's really hard to gauge where we're at as a board member by looking at the weekly update information that we get on hiring, and then trying to tease out what the HR report that we approve on the consent agenda at the end of the month means. Like, some of it doesn't make sense but it's not meant, I think, in the way that we're trying to use it. So I'm wondering if it might be helpful eventually to do some sort of a net gain analysis, so that we really can look at the number of teachers being hired, the number of teachers that have retired or have left the district. So we get an understanding of where we are sort of in that process. So Tracy, I love data too, so I'd be happy to talk to you about how that looks. We can have a data discussion. So yeah, exactly. But I just want to again express appreciation for you coming to the board tonight and answering all the questions and giving this presentation, and thanks for all the work to improve processes. All right, Dr. Jenkins.
Yeah, I just think we need to calibrate. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, we're gonna have to calibrate around the review, the report, and then what we're hearing from the report and what we're really doing tonight. I think that there were a number of things that were lifted that probably we had no idea outside of HR what was going on for the most part of us. But I want to calibrate because those things that were brought up, your questions and what the report said and what we know in terms of reality. I think the next 30 days, there are some low hanging fruit that we need to come together and make sure that happens because we have to restore trust and confidence, not just in HR. Appreciate that, Board Member Nichols. It's in all of us, MMSD. Everything, every aspect of this organization is MMSD, and that's what we have to do. And we'll start with HR intentionally, okay? And we need to roll together on it and make sure that we get it done. And I'll bring the recommendations to the board, but I'll come back trying to making sure that we answer the questions you've given us. And if there are other questions that you do have, let's get those out so when we come back. And I think if we keep it right here in this committee, we can come back and speak intentionally about the things that you want to know about, the things that we need to share with the public. This report, we did it for a reason. So now let's respond to it, okay?
Great, thanks, Dr. Jenkins. Before I entertain a motion to adjourn, I just want to remind everybody that we do have 2 more listening sessions for the board this week. One is at Memorial High School on Wednesday at 6 p.m. and the other is at West High School on Thursday at 5:30 p.m. So we'll see you all again soon. With that, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Those in favor? Aye. Hey, we are adjourned. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you all of HR for what you've done. Thank you, everybody.